Oh. Hey, by gum. Oh la la. And let's go to live chat and let's go to hello everyone. Let's see if we can't neaten this up a bit. Well, you're going to want to view this area a bit more because there's a rather large gentleman joined me of the fluffy variety, currently taking up the whole bed. That's roughly about right. Hello everyone. Sorry I'm running a little bit late this evening. My phone has died. I've been out building all day, which probably explains how I've managed to use 4,500 calories today because it's been freezing cold. So I hope you don't mind, but before I start anything, I'm going to open this. Fiberglass is not good for your fingers. Thank you to my very, very kind Drakenfennel and his soundproofing material. That's made all of today possible. Plus his electric screwdriver, because mine is just pathetic. Really. I have a very good one for model railways. Not a very good one, it turns out, for doing what you need to do when you're building things. Hello, you're getting closer and closer. You will eventually want to jump into the picture, but you're just being bashful, aren't you? Yes. All right. Hello, Albert Zaski. Hello, John Shea. Hello, Rick Vasa. Saba. Hello, Nautical Wolf. Occasionally, I have actually started early in the past, but this one was scheduled back to 7 o'clock because of what I was doing today and all the weird stuff I had going on. So, I am apologies for the late start. Apologies. Ryan. Hello, King's Rook. Hello, Nancy. Goncons. Hello. Just last week's. King's Rook watching me at double speed. That could be quite disturbing. Hello, Greg Starsky. I haven't yet managed to see the dry dock today, so please, no spoilers. And yes, if anyone's been watching, you will know now I'm now a regular in the Armchair Admirals for World of Warships. And in March, he said he'd do it to us on Bilge Pumps when we were recording latest episode of Bilge Pumps. So we could well be in Matapan, joined by the one, the only, Jamie Seedell. Could be Bilge Pumps on World of Warships. We can all be scared. There's a lot of discussion on Blackburn going on, and latter-day biplane. Hello, DGB40, Derp Squad, and Calvin Gasbert, and Dunrick Ironhammer. Hello, South Thompson. Family first, remember. Yeah, all the fiberglass is done. Oh, fiberglass. Doesn't matter how many gloves you wear, doesn't matter what you do, you still get fiberglass strands in your hands and everywhere else. Wearing face masks is about the only thing you can do to stop breathing in them. There is a fluffy research assistant. Hello, come on, up we go. Up we go. Hello. Come on. Come and say hello. 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 Oh, the fluffy research assistant is here, as required. Hello, Shayna. Hello. Hello, IKB402. Hello, Osprey28. And hello, Keithran. Hello, Nautical. Jack Hunter, Old Richard, and Greg Selsky. Hello, everyone. Hello. Sorry I was about a minute late. Hello, Yickers. Hello, Jeff Beeler. Hello, Dylan Lair. As the own brand Iron Brew. Oh, I'm not sure about that stuff. Could be scary. Go on, Collars. You're trying to take the place over. We're slowly getting there. Ooh. Hello. Hello. I can see you all now. You're sniffing books, aren't you? And going, do you like the smell of the books? That's an important test of a book, because if he doesn't like the smell of the book, it's probably not a good book. Oh, sorry to bring modern politics events in, but after China saying their warships can open fire on other ships and the US sending Coast Guard vessels into the South China Sea, how do you think a war between US and China would play out, at least naval aspect? Well, actually, sending the Coast Guard in is rather a clever idea. Because if China decides to open fire on a Coast Guard vessel, they're kind of using, well, anything is using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. And they're going to look like they're weak. The trouble is for the Americans is, honestly, their largest Coast Guard vessels are amateurs compared to what China and Japan have. And the Coast Guard vessels normally make their point by ramming into each other and are actually designed for it. I don't think the National Security Cutter is actually designed with that in mind. So I worry about the poor Americans, because I think they're going to... Theirs are designed for tootling around the world and looking nice in white, and for dealing with drug smugglers and those sort of people who tend to have a level of firepower but don't have a level of state-sanctioned level of firepower. But it's interesting. So I'm afraid, because I've spent the day doing all I have, it's only a smaller pile of books today. Not because it's going to be shorter, although we might finish at about 10 o'clock, but because, frankly, I'm whacked after spending the day doing building work. And it's supposed to be done for me. It was supposed to be done. Above, it is an unlikely scenario. I don't think the Chinese and the Americans will go to war just yet. But I think the trouble is, as a point I was making in today's Long Patrol, which came out, the art one about the Greenwich Naval College, that we don't do long-term thinking anymore, it seems. And that's where China has managed to steal the advance, because they have done long-term thinking more recently than perhaps we have. Actually, no, the interesting question is going to be, what does Jamie get asked what would improve World of Warships? Because he both loved World of Warships when he beta tested it, and has a lot of comments about how to improve it. Mm-hmm. Cool, the beginning points, Martini and Henry. Ah, cool. Mm-hmm. What if the Chinese Coast Guard fires on the US Coast Guard? As I said, they won't fire, they might well bash into them. Rick Vasava, we need a war to jumpstart the economy. There are lots of ways to jumpstart the economy. If you're going to consider the build-up at the end of the Cold War done by Reagan really jump-started the American economy, and that you can argue the American economy is in many ways still riding that in a technological fashion. As think about that, so all the technology developed during the Reagan era is still the basis for the technology which is still being used to this day. What are you looking? Ah, my thing. Right then, so, first book today I'm going to look at, and this is a bit sort of late start, so this is starting at about about 12 minutes in, we'll call it. It's a new book. And it's from the lovely people of Pen and Sword, who sent me another book for me to have a look at. And it is called Mediterranean Naval Battles That Changed the World. And it's by Quentin Russel. For starters, it's a lovely looking book. And it does still have the new book smell. Again, this is one of the review books sent to me. This book is actually a 2021 publication. So this is as new as they come. It's got Lepanto on the back. Now, Mediterranean Naval Battles That Changed the World. It has Salamis, 480 BC. Actium, 31 BC. Lepanto, 1571. Abercurbe, 1798. Navarino, 1827. And Cape Matapan and the Battle for Malta, 1940 to 42. Well, I have to say, okay, it's a good list, and you're going to enjoy it when I read it out. But I would add, there are a couple of battles I would like to see in there. There are some of the Venetian versus Ottomans, i.e. some of the stuff around, especially, which we've already discussed, around Crete. And various other islands in the Peloponnesians and Greek islands would be quite useful and quite interesting to have in there, and certainly did have a major impact. I can understand the list he's gone with. It's a good list. There's none I would get rid of. There are just others I might be tempted to add. No World War One Adriatic in there, Carl. But we'll see. I'll be making the patron announcement after I've gone through this and tell you what's going to be in the next patron. New IKB 472. So would the Coast Guard be wise to copy the Sea Shepherd's can opener? Ooh. Tempting. Could be interesting. JP, Canada's DeWolves have been criticised for having too small a gun. Now it's obvious that they were actually designed for ramming, not shooting. Well, ramming ice and having Coast Guard battles is probably going to be a big part of their careers. In fact, honestly, you take one of the DeWolves to the South China Sea, there isn't much that's going to stand against that hull. Because that hull is built to take a lot worse than bashing into another ship. Now, let's see, which battle was I going to go for? Yeah, Navarino. So, it has nice pictures in it, and that's always a big thing for me. If you're like me and you like to be able to visualize something as you're reading it, the pictures really, really matter, and having good quality ones matters. Now, this is nice in that regards. Still, Navarino. Lepanto. Abercurbe. Now, Navarino takes place in 1827, and it's a European coalition united by the cause of Greek liberty, defeats the Turkish navy to create an independent Greek state and further weaken the grip of the Ottoman Empire on Europe. Now, Early on a bright Sunday morning in October 1827, a combined fleet of British, French, and Russian warships was slowly manoeuvring into line a few miles out from the entrance to Navarino Bay in the western Peloponnese. In the van were the British ships under Admiral Coddington, who, as the senior ranking officer, it had been agreed should assume overall command. Some 5 miles to the rear were the French and the Russians. Well, you know, he didn't want them getting too close. Boarded up inside the bay, a large Ottoman fleet made up of Egyptian, Turkish, and Tunisian vessels lay at anchor. What was to happen next hung delicately in balance, and to a large extent would be determined by events out of the immediate control of the supreme commanders. Although officially the fleets were not at war, the ships of the Western Allies were intent on entering the bay at the ready. Charles Macpherson, a sailor aboard the British frigate Genoa, recalled that the tubs were filled with shot and everything else prepared. The men were at battle stations, and at 6 bells in the forenoon watch, 1100 hours, they mustered into position, encouraged by their officers. Lieutenant Brooke with the words, "Now, my men, you see we are going into the harbour today. I know you'll be right glad of it. At least, I suppose you would be as much against cruising off here all winter as I am. So I say, let's in today, fight it out like British seamen, and if we fall, why, there's an end to our cruise. I hope when the guns are to man, you'll all be at your stations." Interesting questions. Dylan Lamb. Crazy to think that the Ottoman Empire was still a threat to Europe in the 1800s. Has to be one of the most successful empires of history. Definitely up there. Many of the men had been up most of the night, so if they could, they took the opportunity to grab some sleep between the guns as the ship advanced towards an unknown outcome. If the two fleets were not at war, the question was, why were they so primed for action? For the Ottomans, led by Ibrahim Pasha of Egypt, too were at the ready. The European allies, as was to become more common practice in recent times, were acting as mediators in a bloody conflict between Greek revolutionaries or freedom fighters and their Turkish overlords. The Greeks had raised their banner of liberty on the 25th of March 1821 in a bid to gain independence from the Ottoman Empire, and with their supporters had swiftly taken control of much of the Peloponnese. In the following euphoria, a revolutionary government was installed in Nafilion, but its continuing survival was heavily dependent on aid and money from abroad. If the mood of the people throughout Europe and America might be moving in favour of ideas of national liberation encouraged by the French Revolution, their governments were more cautious, and the nascent Greek government had to put all its diplomatic efforts into achieving official international recognition as the revolt dragged on. In a mismatch of resources of the Turks, the Greeks had one advantage: their skill as sailors. The rebels' initial success had been largely due to their makeshift navy, whose efforts had been prevented the Turks from reinforcing their troops from the sea. Initially caught on the back foot and bottled up in their few remaining strongholds, when the Turks finally reacted, they did so in strength and with ruthless ferocity. To quell the revolt in 1822, Sultan Mahmud II turned to his semi-autonomous Egyptian vassal, Mehmed Muhammad Ali Pasha. Mehmed Ali and his son Ibrahim had spent the years since Napoleon's invasion reforming and modernizing Egypt with the help of European expertise, and as a result, he possessed a modern, disciplined army and navy, trained in the main by French officers. Mehmed and Ibrahim were also ambitious, and the Sultan was wary of their growing power. As a inducement for them to commit to helping the Ottoman cause, the Sultan offered them the Pashaliks of Crete to Mehmed, and Maria, the Peloponnese, to Ibrahim, if they would reconquer the empire's lost territories. Crete had never been totally lost to the Turks, but it still took 2 years for Mehmed's Egyptian troops to finally bring the island to heel. With Crete subdued, the Sultan's plan was to use it as a stepping stone to bring the Greek islands back under control and to invade the Peloponnese. In the meantime, an army coming overland from the north would have the Greeks squeezed within a pizza movement. The Sultan's plans were delayed when the Greek navy managed to thwart the Turks' attempt to take the important islands of Samos, Spetses, and Hydra, stalling their invasion of Peloponnese and forcing the Turkish fleet to withdraw to Bodrum, where they waited to be joined by an Egyptian fleet out from Alexandria. Ibrahim had decided to concentrate his efforts on the Peloponnese and a vast armada of 400 ships, including 54 warships and transports carrying 14,000 infantry, 2,000 cavalry, and 500 artillerymen, plus their 150 cannon, the largest seen in the eastern Mediterranean since Napoleon's invasion, set off for its rendezvous. Hello, Bijan. The planned invasion got no further when a Greek fleet of up to 75 ships engaged 100 of the Ottoman fighting ships in open water off Cape Canaris, close to the island of Levos. Using their favourite weapon, the fire ship, the Greeks managed to destroy 6 enemy warships, but at considerable loss. Nevertheless, the Turks were obliged to delay again and winter in Crete until in February 1825, on French advice, Ibrahim decided it would be to his advantage not to wait for the calms of summer that suited lighter Greek ships, but to launch his invasion now. On the 23rd and 24th, Ibrahim landed the advance body of his army on a Turkish-held former Venetian stronghold of Molon, or Methoni. Having taken his opponents by surprise, he was soon making good the Turkish losses, aided in part by civil war and dissension between the Greek factions. He set about ravishing the countryside, securing Turkish positions, and besieging Greek strongholds. The Arbor and forts at Navrino were taken in early 1825, and followed by Argos within striking distance of Nefalion. In the meantime, the Turkish army under Rashid Pasha had advanced to Missolonghi, where the poet Lord Byron had died in 1824 from the north. After a prolonged siege, the town eventually fell in 1826, after it was starved into submission with Ibrahim's aid. Next June, Rashid was in Athens, the last major stronghold in central Greece. After 6 years of brutal warfare, the Greek revolt was floundering. While many Philhellenes across Europe and America have been galvanized by Byron's death and the devastation of Morea to continue to fight for Greek liberty, their governments were still sitting on the fence, wary of the rivals and consequence of intervention on the international balance of power and established order. Without official foreign backing, the revolt looked doomed. However, reports that Ibrahim intended to make the Peloponnese into a wasteland and then people it with immigrants from Egypt, coupled with the courage of the beleaguered fighters, played into the Philhellenes' hands, and enough public support was mobilized to finally persuade the British, French, and Russian governments to act. The Russians were already committed to helping their Christian Orthodox brethren, and perhaps gain a little territory at Turkish expense themselves. And with the sympathetic George Canning replacing Castlereagh as Britain's Foreign Secretary, the policy of non-intervention brokered by Prince Metternich, his Austrian counterpart at the conclusion of the Napoleonic War, began to unravel. To preempt Russian unilateral action, in July 1827, Canning, now Prime Minister, persuaded France and Russia to sign the Treaty of London, whereby the Free Powers agreed to induce an armistice between the belligerents and start peace negotiations. The terms of the treaty urged the Sultan to recognise the independence of Greece whilst remaining its supreme ruler. The Porte, the Ottoman government in Constantinople, were understandably unwilling to make such concessions from a winning position, while the hard-pressed Greek provisional government and Napoleon was happy to accept the terms. As the diplomatic posturing got underway, the Greek government were quite willing to talk, but this did not put an end to the fighting, which continued, in part encouraged by Western volunteers leading groups of irregulars. Particularly responsible were Sir Richard Church and Lord Thomas Cochrane, an army and naval commander who had so wholeheartedly thrown themselves into the Greek cause that although they were theoretically acting on behalf of their governments, they were independently waging their own war against the Turks. Their activities led to the Turks protesting they could not negotiate while hostilities were continuing. Let's be honest, Cochrane and Church were two of the most unconventional commanders the British could muster. And setting them loose on anyone was a bit cruel. Setting them loose together on someone was very cruel. Very, very cruel. So let's see, what's questions? Tom Golding, Mauryan War, 1680s Venetian the Turk was estimated in import and overshadowed by the wars of the Sun King and William Orange. If nothing else, it blew up the Parthenon. Yep, and a few other things as well. Vision, was this one of the last Seafire ships in Naval combat? Mustn't be. Mm-hmm. Jeff Healer, yes, people did not realise the Canadian Coast Guard will be armed with the DeWolf itself. Now that I think of it, I wonder why Harper did not rename it the Royal Canadian Coast Guard. Well, actually, I can give you some history about the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard is actually the first Navy of Canada. Originally, they started off with a fishery protection service, and that became the Coast Guard and the Navy. And the reason the fishery protection service wasn't considered royal, and wasn't called royal, was so that the Royal Navy couldn't call it up to serve and fight in its wars, so it would stay in Canada even while Britain was fighting a war elsewhere in the world. And basically, it's a reaction to the problems that come about because of the age of sail ending and the age of steam and engine power beginning. I.e., in the age of sail, the ships on the America station were not exactly going to be called anywhere, because by the time the signal reached to call them to go anywhere, and they then moved, whatever had happened would have been dealt with. But the thing is, once you have the age of steam, you also have the age of the telegram and the undersea cables, and that means you might well lose the ships to somewhere else or some other hotspot which needed them. So, hence, the Canadian Coast Guard has never really had the Royal in its title, as I understand it. Not a wolf. The Vietnam War had people fighting on each side. It was well known, but left unacknowledged by politicians. Oh, yes. Although, one of the interesting things that comes out with the Vietnamese War, and you should never forget this one, the amount of times people will tell you the best scoring North Vietnamese fighter pilots were all Russians, etc. They weren't. In fact, the Russian pilots who went out to help the Vietnamese with their aircraft actually took back a lot of the good lessons learnt for them by the Vietnamese. And it was the Vietnamese, in many ways, who were teaching the Russians how to get better, how to use their aircraft better against the American aircraft. Hello, Carl. Hello, everyone. If I've missed any saying hello to anyone, hello. As I said, it's been a fun day. It really has. Let's see if this is working now, because I haven't sent links to people I normally send links to. Oh, good. Right. Hello. What are you doing now? Are you trying to get onto the bed, or are you just trying to knock things out? Do you just not like that in your way? Hello. Yes, the fluffy research assistant is being very, very cute today. Hello, Jespy. No. This is a good book. It's $42.95 US, £25 UK. And as I said, it has Salamis, Actium, Lepanto, Naval, Navarino, Matapan, and the Siege of Malta. Thank you, I look fabulous. Thank you, I am. Right, I'm just going to text the link to my girlfriend's mum and my girlfriend, because I always do, and I didn't because the phone had no power. I don't know. The phone had no power. It was fun. Share. Had no power. Right, and I'll be getting back to the books in a second. I'm just making sure I've sent these to the right people. Oh, can I move 1 foot, please? Oh, thank you. You really are making lying on the legs. Don't I? Yes, I know. Never work with. Ow! Ooh, those bits are attached too. Okay, you decided to go to the bed. Have you? Oh, you can lay out, and I can scratch your tummy. You see, is that it? No. Now, what are you doing? You okay? You positioned all right, or you trying to throw things everywhere? Okay, out we go. You safe? On. Hey. Oh, I don't know. You are such a fluffy research assistant. Right. It's a good book. And it's a really fun book to read. Then fluffy research assistant. Draw me like one of your French dogs. This one's more likely to say, draw me like a, National Canadian Hockey League player. Or a Seahawk. He quite likes them. Right? You quite like the Seahawks, don't you? Yes, you do. Right, let's see. Mm-hmm. So, Scott, the Russians and Chinese were much more valuable to the Vietnamese in supplying and maintaining things like the command and control systems than in direct combat roles. Yes, in that one, they were absolutely critical. It's amazing how much they are. Sorry. I managed to get sawdust and plastic fiber everywhere. I was wearing a mask and fiberglass, but I've still got it everywhere. I'm going to take another shower after this is over. Carl, well, this one's brand new from Pen and Sword. The one I was just reading. Mediterranean Naval Battles That Changed the World by Quentin Russel. Very, very good book. Very interesting read. Oh, I love you. Oh. So, next book. Ah, this one. Rather cool back cover. I think you might find this one on Pen and Sword as well, from memory. It's March to the South Atlantic by Nick Vaux. 4-2 Commando, Royal Marines, in the Falklands War. Forward is, of course, by Max Hastings. Vacuum cleaner and shower. Okay. Well, this one. Okay. The order to confirm that K Company would move straight off for the top of Mount Kent once they were completed on the landing zone, several hundred feet below the summit. By then, the guns and mortars with ammunition should be in place, although Command HQ and Blowpipe would still be flying in. We should have a beyond the ground long before Babington's Marines came into contact with the enemy. In any case, that was Peter's show, not mine. He would have his own forward observation officer, Captain Chris Romberg, at Royal Artillery, directing the guns, with a mortar fire controller. As it happened, he was an experienced fire support specialist himself. At first light next morning, we would attempt to get blowpipe missiles up to him, since it was clear from the map that the men carrying them would never make it with those loads in the dark. The SAS already in place on Mount Kent would provide guides as far as the summit. Towards the end of the morning, I began to fret that we had received no word of any helicopter presence for the afternoon. An operation of this complexity simply cannot be mounted without detailed preliminary coordination, though we could probably have dispensed with rehearsals. Even now, control of the helicopters was still retained by the Commodore on board Fearless, so the hard-pressed brigade staff could provide only partial reassurance to our anxious inquiries. The reason that was the case was because the brigade staff actually didn't have the facilities ashore at this point to control the helicopters themselves, especially not the number that they were supposed to do. Why? Because that particular section of staff had been cut down because it wasn't needed, because they'd be slotting into Norwegian air traffic control if they went to Norway, wouldn't they? Yeah, because of course, what were we all fighting? We were all going to fight for the 4 days in the Cold War against the Russians, and then it was going to go nuclear, so there was no need to have anything else because you weren't going to have to fight anywhere else. Heard that before? A further distinction was that we had remained at 1 hour's notice to move since first light, in case surrender negotiations at Goose Green went wrong. Eventually, Matt Sturman managed to talk a passing Wessex down, and we lobbied the pilot to impress on his own HQ that time was running out. Especially disconcerting to find that the Wessex pilot seemed to have heard nothing of about the operation, although he could not have taken part, as he was not trained to fly with passive night goggles himself. Anxiety over the ALF deepened as K Company started to assemble their stores on the landing site. At last, to our relief, we received an inbound consisting not only of a Sea King, but also the vital Chinook. As they settled amidst the clouds of debris, it seemed that our plans might prevail after all. Naval pilot Sea King, however, immediately confirmed my worst fears. He declared that he and his crews had only been tasked with the operation that morning, and so could provide just 2 sorties that night instead of the 3 we needed. Worse was to come, however, from the RAF squadron leader of the Chinook. He and his crew had been operating non-stop for nearly 48 hours. It was essential that they should now rest. One glance at his haggard, shaven face and red-rimmed eyes was enough to confirm this total exhaustion. He did, however, with gallant self-sacrifice, to lift in the guns if the Navy could take the rest of us. But the Sea Kings were committed elsewhere. To reschedule them needed more time than we had left. The infuriating, inescapable fact was that we were only going to get to Mount Kent that night if the plan was drastically modified. It was the bitterest moment of the war thus far. Thus followed an acrid and acrimonious conversation between John Chester, the brigade major, and myself. I was furious that we appeared to have been let down by the staff. He was adamant they had done all they could. Both of us knew only too well that they had done all they could, too well. The circumstances might change at any moment, perhaps irrevocably diverting resources elsewhere. Selfishly, I was more concerned with getting my unit into battle than recognizing that pressures and strains prevailing in that HQ over the past few days. While as Brigade Major, John Chester might have been too preoccupied with his own problems to realize that I might have to tell 4-2 for the second time that they were not going to fight after all. Eventually we reached an uneasy compromise. K Company, TAC HQ and the 4 81mm mortars would fly in that night. The remainder would have to wait until the following evening. Both of us knew that reinforcements would by then be crucial. The risks had now intensified. After a confirmatory O group, with most of us blacked out and rigged for action, the laden files of the first wave began to assemble in the twilight. I had a few quiet words with Peter before watching the Sea Kings grumble raucously off into an ominous sky of scurrying black clouds. There would still be time to return to the command post to monitor progress before I left. My own stick, consisting of the RSM, AMOA, radio operators, and provost protection, was already assembled on our associated load of equipment. But we were to be forwarded once again. Halfway through the mountains, the 4 Sea Kings were enveloped in a whiteout. This is an exceptionally dangerous condition in which the swirling blanket of snow blots out all the pilot's reference points. Only an instant landing on instruments can prevent disaster. The helicopters were compelled to do so again and again before they could extricate themselves and return to base. Listening to the terse, fraught exchanges between pilots and their control provided tension enough. But when on their return I saw the drawn, silent faces of invariably cheerful K Company Marines, the extent of their ordeal was underlined. Strapped claustrophobically together in the dark, unable to hear one another properly, confused and anxious, they were confined apprehensively for nearly 2 hours. Spasmodically, the engines bellowed and shuddered as the helicopters lurched sickeningly while the pilots fought against the blizzard. Then Sparks issued the lads with some rum, which he had hoarded from somewhere, and I broached the first of my medical reserves from the CO's box for a tight-lipped Peter Babington. Peter was normally so imperturbable that it was all too clear that what he and his men endured. Uncertainty and tension persisted on the following morning. Reassuringly, early in the afternoon, an RN movement control team at last appeared. Their expertise in special communications facilities, linked into the command HQ, would infinitely improve the control and flexibility once this complex move had commenced. The planning payload, determined by factors such as radius of action and flying conditions, had to be transformed into lists of men or equipment, and these in turn were governed by tactical considerations at the other end. There was no point in landing in tactical order without the right communications or ammunition, for instance. The operation officer, Ian McNeil, would have been coming with me, which left Matt Sturman with the responsibility for coordinating support for the operation from Commander HQ, and logistics build-up in the days to come. I was reminded again of how fortunate we were to have acquired an additional officer of his capability and experience. Even so, this was one of those occasions where we would desperately need a second in command. "This time lucky, sir," said Mr. Crisnell that evening, with the impassive conviction which RSM seemed to acquire. I sincerely hoped he was right. A swift trip to Brigade HQ and a sympathetic chat with John Chester revealed that too many other commitments were building up for the Mount Kent project to be kept alive much longer, but at least we now had the huge Newton back, so that the guns and ammunition could fly in with us. Mercifully, I had no idea then that the operation was almost cancelled yet again. A message was received at Brigade HQ which stated that the RN Helicopter Squadron can undertake no further flying for the moment because of overcommitment. In the end, only John Chester's vigorous personal intervention ensured that we would get a second attempt. So as it turned out, previous misgivings about staff commitment to the operation proved to be premature and unjustified. While I was at Brigade, I bumped into Paul Stevenson. He had just landed with General Jeremy Moore's divisional HQ in advance of 5th Infantry Brigade, after both had transferred from QE2 to Canberra. Suddenly, the mood of frustration and worry seemed to be lifting. Goose Green had been a fine victory. 2 units, 4, 5, and 3 para, were now well forward towards the enemy. The air attacks were appreciatively diminishing. Now we were to be reinforced. To cap it all, I got back to find that there was mail bringing news of loved ones far removed from the discomfort and tension of present circumstances. Morale shot up accordingly. By the evening meal, which was being centrally prepared in a shearing shed, the conviction that we would get to Mount Kent this time seemed unanimous. I chatted to several of K Company's veterans of the previous night to get a feel for their attitude towards the second attempt. No one was much looking forward to the flying, which seemed to have taken their minds off what might happen at the other end. Everyone knew that the next 24 hours would be the most dangerous, but the majority believed that once Mount Kent had been seized, we could hold it until reinforcement. It was quite clear that they were absolutely determined to get there. I had no doubts that they would succeed, once given the chance. Now, if I skip ahead a little bit. A little bit along, and this operation had been taking place. In the middle of this frenzied reorganization, the RSM tapped me on the shoulder. "I think you ought to know, sir," he snarled with evident resentment, "that reporter, Max Hastings, is trying to infiltrate one of our helicopters." "Send for him," I howled distractedly, as yet another call came through from Commander HQ. Shortly afterwards, the unmistakable bulk of Max loomed over me. "Hello, Nick," he said warmly, as if we were going and meeting unexpectedly while out shooting. "How's it going?" I struggled to maintain my equilibrium. "Max, I don't know what you're doing here, because you're not even one of my journalists, But in the event there are no spare spaces for correspondence, we haven't even enough for ourselves. My dear Nick, there's no question of taking any of those places. I'm with Mike Rose. The Brigadier personally allocated me to a place with the SAS reinforcements. I returned to more pressing problems, leaving a smouldering Chisnell to squeeze Hastings' frame into a helicopter. At last it was done, so Dennis assured me, as he and I stood and took the edge. For a moment, without speaking, he represented the best of every quartermaster I'd ever known, a loyal, dependable, almost mysterious figure whose pronouncements even COs queried at their peril. He was also a friend. Mm-hmm. This is the next chapter on. It was time to set out with blowpipe missiles for K Company. The RSM began to concentrate on unwieldy group. I had decided to leave Ian McNeil behind with David Brown. If anything happened to me, they would maintain liaison and contact direction between K Company and main HQ in Port San Carlos. Apart from the 6 cumbersome missiles and a dozen or so handlers, we needed a strong escort team. Mike Rose and Max Hastings also decided to come along for the ride. Sometime the previous evening, I discovered that the latter had bamboozled everyone, because the SAS had never given him a place at all, nor had he had permission from the brigade commander. Indignation would have been futile, however. Max was a professional journalist who sought news however he could get it. As things turned out, he had not actually displaced anyone, and now was on hand to record one of the most significant moves of the war. Anyway, I appreciated his initiative and had always admired his writing. My prejudice in favour was suppressed by detailing him to carry a blowpipe missile. Which I can testify, weigh a bomb. Vision, Trafalgar not in that book, occurred just beyond the Gates of Hercules in the Atlantic? Just, yes, in the Mediterranean book. Derbscod, Sea Slug SAM system. Not a good SAM system, a great Cyclops weapon. With the ungodly noisy missiles were fired over Argentina's conscript's head. Well, you know, whatever works. Nick Waters. 4-2, you don't want those Paras to beat you there, do you? You'll never live it down. Stanley's that way. And go, yeah. Jack Campbell, speaking of books, Falklands, do you know of any books that go into HMS Brecon and Ledbury, sailing down with RSMS St. Helena? No, I don't think any. I can't think. There might be a book, actually, that nurse's book might do that. There is a nursing book which might do that. I'd have to. It's in one of my boxes. Vision, not very sporting of Argentina not to invade Norway. No, it's terribly cruel them. King's Rook, an RFRA has joined me. That's good. It's always good to have a fluffy research assistant. Vision, does this book cover all operations during Falklands War? Would like to read good general book on the conflict with lots of photos and graphics. This covers all the experience of 4-2 Commando, which is quite considerable. It does have good maps. It does have good photos in it. Photos taken at the time. But my copy is an old one. There is a new one published by Pen and Sword. I know that much. Nice maps. And of course, 4-2 Commando got involved at South Georgia, if I remember correctly. I always love this. One of the messages from Captain Scott Mason of SS Canberra sends back a message, a telex to P&O head office. This is after he's delivered his troops off into the Falkland Sound, into San Carlos Bay. It's about this time that Captain Scott Mason sent back a telex to P&O head office with the stylish he concluded, "Have delivered passengers as requested." That's a cool picture. Cross-decking to HMS Fearless. 4-0 Commander cross-decking into HMS Fearless. And here's some more pictures. Basically, the move to Mount Kent matters because you control Mount Kent. You control a large chunk of the Falkland Islands. Dope Squad, do you know any good academic articles, books on the war of choice doctrine? I'm wanting to write a paper on how it's a fallacy and buying into it puts the UK at a disadvantage. Oh, there was one on JSTOR I downloaded the other day, but if I activate JSTOR, that will turn off the stream because I've tried that. So, yeah. There is one. I think it's by one of the academics from Shrivenham, from the Defence Studies Department of King's College London at Shrivenham. King's Rook. Anyone else not seen the books in the description? No, I'm sorry. Today I didn't have time to upload. I finished the YouTube Long Patrol I recorded this morning, and I've been out in the cold ever since. I literally finished that at about I finished and uploaded that by 11:30. Well, roughly 11:30. Had it out by 20 to 12. And I got in about 10 to 7. Because our builders have pretty much walked off the site. And here's the thing. It tells you how good a job they've done. The builders themselves started off by asking for... Well, they were supposed to get just under $5,000. And they started off by asking for $3,000. And they settled for less in terms of a payment. And it sits there and goes, you know how much you haven't done. Discord, should I contact you on Discord instead of War of Choice? Yes, please. If you do that, I will get back to you. I am getting better at remembering to check Discord. I am getting better at it. I don't always remember, but I do try. Ah. Oh. And then... Nah, that was a cool one. Oh. Johnson Beharry. Barefoot Soldier. VC. Johnson Beharry VC. Private Beharry carried out 2 individual acts of great heroism by which he saved the lives of his comrades. Both were in direct face of the enemy, under intense fire, at great personal risk to himself, one leading to him sustaining very serious injuries. His valour is worthy of the highest recognition. Right then. Now let's go to... Again, it's got good pictures. Okay, this is it. This is the moment we've been waiting for, Mr. Dean says, as we gather around our vehicles under the glare of lights in the tank park. Operation Pimlico. Our chance to take the initiative for a change. The plan is for A Company, the Royal Welsh Fusiliers, to go into the housing district just north of us, snatch around a dozen people who've been identified as leaders of the unrest movement, and bring them back to Abernage for questioning. We're excited and the boss knows it. At long last, we're doing something about all that we've been getting since we arrived. The housing district, on the southern edge of Almara, is also the place where most of the rocket and mortar attacks have been coming from. The job of A Platoon is to conduct a route clearance for the Royal Welsh Fusiliers all the way to the outskirts of the town, then wait at Broadmoor, just to the south. From there, we'll get ready to give assistance to the Royal RWF if they need it. Although we're not taking a direct route in the a direct role in the arrest stop, we're going to have a busy day. When Pimlico is over, we must prepare the warriors for a major resupply of Simic House. Food, water, ammunition, and personnel. All the things we take for granted in Abernage. Currently, A Platoon is the warrior reserve, which means we'll remain on standby in the camp, ready to support 7 and 9 platoons, units actively involved in the resupply mission, if we're needed. It's just starting to get light when we roll out of Abernage and turn onto Red Route. We head north in box formation. Us and Whiskey 2, 3, Louis' vehicle in front, Whiskey 2-2, Broomsticks wagon, and Whiskey 2-1, Joe Taylor's, bring up the rear. From Red 4 onwards, we move not much faster than walking pace, stopping every 50 metres to scan the route ahead. In a route clearance, a lot of surveillance task falls on the driver. Using the 8 times magnification of the day sight, we look for anything that could suggest the presence of a roadside bomb. A suspicious-looking car, a newly disturbed pile of sand, even dead animals by the side of the road. If we see something we don't like the look of, we call the ream. A part which seems a bit Yeah, it's ream and raw logistics score. Broadmoor is we pull into, apart from a dustbin lid that gets mistaken for a mine, we find nothing to get excited about. The route is clear. Pimlico can begin. We pull into Broadmoor and park up, listening to our radios as the RLF go into the housing district. They're going on foot to arrest the suspects and bring them out in Saxons and Statchers. Broadmoor is a strange place. It's a prison that never got finished. There's no light or water in the buildings, and rubble all over the place. Despite the heat, most of us prefer to stay in the vehicles rather than hang around the half-finished cell blocks. So how come the army has to go and arrest these people? Sammy asks. I thought the idea was the local police to take charge. Can't trust them, that's the problem, Mr. Dean says. I can hear him munching on a sandwich he picked up from the cookhouse before he left camp. What do you mean, boss? I asked. More often than not, he says, they're the guys who are shooting at us. This place is a total mash-up, I say. Too effing right, Sammy adds. Mr. Dean carries on eating. He says nothing. From the traffic overnight, it seems that the insurgency leaders are being rounded up and arms and explosive caches found without a shot being fired, until shortly before 0530, when we hear one of the arrest teams report contact. A couple of minutes later, there is another contact, and then another. As the call signs report them, we hear gunshots over the radio, and the crack, crack, crack of small arms fire not too far away. We get the order to go and help the RWF extract back to Abu Naj. We're directed by Zero to a street corner on Red Route, where the dismounts are waiting to be picked up. The first time we go down the road, we see nothing. Mr. Dean orders us to turn around and head back, while he checks with Zero on the radio. Then suddenly, I spot a group of dismounts moving up an alleyway towards us. Battened down in the Warrior, we don't hear the shots, but I can see them returning fire in the direction they've just come from. I stamp on the brakes and reverse up to the corner. We open the door, and the several dismounts pile into the back. I hear Sammy traversing the turret, looking for targets, but whoever's doing the shooting remains well hidden, and when we've picked as many men as we can carry, we close the door and move off. Whiskey 2-2 and Whiskey 2-3 take those we can't fit in. The rest get picked up by Saxons and Statchers at RVs, where the threat isn't quite as intense. It's a good book. It is a good book. Oh, Anonymous is here. To be honest, there's a fair amount of Russian stuff translated into English if you know where to look. Usually on German websites, strangely enough. Don't ask me why. It's usually on German websites that they translate it. Ooh. Hello, you papa dog. You're good, FRA. Yes, you are. John Shane, what did I miss? Cajun, who was the guy who only got shot at? Only got a GC because he shot up by an A-10. I'm not sure. I think it's someone in Afghanistan. Right. Hello. You come for this one? Someone has come to take the fluffy research assistant away. He's hungry, apparently. He was actually asleep and eyeing up my iron brew, but, you know, we'll go with he was hungry. More than likely East-West Germany, something going on there, but for the Russian language, Russian to English, but without explaining it being translated into German. Not necessarily being translated into English. But it's nice of them to do so. Oh. I finally say I'm still cold. I don't normally get cold, but it has been out. I wasn't cold while building, but the moment I stopped doing the work, I then felt cold. Hadrian, replacing it with the trainee assistant floppy research assistant. I'm not sure. Will the trainee be making a visit at any point? Possibly. Was the shout back up. Come on, has Jamie seen that video I sent you? Yes, we did show it to you. No, we are not polishing what was said on bilge pumps. We try and keep it to an extent polite. No. Next book. Jeremy Bowen. God, that's good. Most universities and academic practice in Europe is done in English. That's a common language. That is quite true. English to German Google Translate is fairly good. That is also true. That is useful. So, this is Jeremy Bowen. He is, of course, war stories, and he is a journalist. But at a certain point, he was committing a crime against humanity. I give you the mustache. Now, this is what it looks like more recently. This is what it looked like in El Salvador. So, I'm not sure if there was a war in El Salvador before he arrived, but that moustache showing up would probably start one on its own if it did arrive. So, I'm going to blame El Salvador on Jeremy Bowen's moustache. It went cruel, Carl, with that video. The ranting went on for a good 2.5 hours. Consider it, not if he was undercover in El Salvador. He wasn't undercover, he was a journalist. That's good. That tash is at one point impressive, and another point should be reported to the Hague. Aren't 70s bar NCO stashes the Mark 1 coming back into some circles? I'm not sure in which circles, and that would scare me. Let's see. Crossley and glamour. Kurt's short size was shining with excitement. It's wild, Jeremy. It's like a movie. Do you want to go downtown? There are buildings exploding and park benches flying through the air. I was planning to go there that day. You've got to run over the bridge to get to the Parliament. In daylight, you don't get the tie if you haven't run over the bridge. Crossley is still the most violent, dangerous place I have ever been. For Kurt, it was like some kind of high-octane fuel. He was hyperactive and even wore a flak jacket, which most of the time he had given up in Sarajevo. We are standing in Minuta Square, one of the hotspots of the First Chechen War in January 1995. It was at one end of the main boulevard that ran up from the dead centre of the town. There was constant gunfire, and the crashing crump of shells. We all got into the armoured BBC Land Rover. I did the driving. It was a classic Soviet Avenue, the kind which probably used to have a special lane in the middle for the important party apparatchiks to swish down in their big cars. But after a couple of weeks of bombardment, you could not exactly follow the white lines. The road was covered with lumps of concrete that had been blown off the buildings. Branches that had been blown off the trees smashed cars and shell holes. I decided that the best thing would be to drive as fast as possible down the middle of the road.
The only people moving were cheerful groups of Chechen fighters, happy at the thought of dying that day, and journalists. The Land Rover spluttered. It had a V8 engine and was not enjoying the gritty, watery, Dangestani petrol we were feeding it. I revved a bit more, and its tube seemed to clear. We set off. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw shells exploding into some of the solid old buildings that line the avenue. In a couple of weeks, the Russian army had gone a long way to turning a steel, stone, and concrete city into rubble. Steve Liggerwood, the cameraman, was filming out of the front windscreen. In the back, the rest of the BBC team were trying to stare past us to see what was coming for them. It can't have been a good feeling to be in someone else's hands, chugging towards what was probably, at that moment, the most dangerous patch of ground in the world. As the Land Rover accelerated ponderously down the road, I saw a bunch of photographers running out of an underpass, led by James Nachtwey, about the most famous of them all these days. It felt better to be inside a Kevlar car than on foot. The armour would not save us if we had a direct hit from a shell, but against anything else it should, I guessed and hoped, be fine. Kurt was joking about the tide. We were not going to try to get anywhere near the Parliament, which was the centre of a cauldron of destruction. In broad daylight, the idea was suicidal. Instead, we were heading for a block of flats that looked down into the danger zone. It sounded like a good place for top shots, and I hoped we might find some people still living in it. I always loved the way the journalist hopes he'd find some people still living and trapped in the middle of a war zone. I understand why for the story pegs, but personally, I'd hope they'd all got out. Bill Bolton, moustache envy. No. You have a moustache. That was a crime. Carmen, did you see The Great Escape as shown on Amazon with Hammond and that Mythbusters guy? Very good. I've got to watch it. Paul Johnson, that tash is nothing compared to David Fletcher's from the Tank Museum. Yeah, but that's a proper tash. Right. I pulled up in front of the building and we piled out. Most of one side of the block, which was about 8 stories high, had been ripped off. Cross-section of rooms and lives had been opened up like a doll's house. Another shell hit the opposite side of the road. We raced for a doorway where some Chechen fighters were standing, as casually fatalistic as usual. In one hand I was carrying a small backpack of camera batteries that felt like it was full of rocks. We ran into the side of the building via the shortest route, which meant jumping over a small wall. My backpack hit the wall and so did I. I was clumsy in my heavy flak jacket, helmet and winter clothes, and I slipped onto some broken glass and gashed my hand. One of the Chechens gestured to the Land Rover. He was saying the Chechen equivalent of "you can't park there." Not because he was unfriendly, but because it was exposed to shell fire and might not be there when we come back. "I'll move it," said Kurt. He grabbed the keys out of my bloody hand and dashed out to where the car was sitting. A few more shells hit the building opposite. He brought it round to the side, where I should have left it in the first place, and came back grinning. "Took care of your car, Mr. Byrne, and now I'd better take care of your hand." I gave him a long bandage, which he started wrapping around the place where the glass had cut me. He was having a great day. We all were. Even though Grozny was dangerous, appalling and brutal, most of the time I was not frightened. Neither was Kurt, and I doubt many of the other journalists there were either. It sounds strange or paradoxical or boastful, but it was none of those things. I do not think of myself as a brave person. I'm not physically aggressive. Raging motorists at traffic lights in London worry me more than most of the shell fire I have experienced. In all the wars I've ever seen, I've had moments of abject terror, but they were just moments. Or a few minutes at least. You cannot be frightened the whole time, even if the place you're in is dangerous all the time, because if you were, you would not be able to function. Human beings are adaptable. You can learn to absorb and ignore a lot of what is going on around you. Minute to Spare was a meeting place for the news people in Grozny. Getting to the square was an achievement, but much harder was getting back to it in one piece from the streets, heading down to the Parliament building. Minute to Spare was a big, windy, open space, bleak and desolate. On the day I came closest to dying there, some of the buildings around it were on fire when we arrived. The Chechen fighters who were always in and around the square, and the Russian warplanes had been attacking, as part of their relentless campaign to stop the Southern Republic from seceding from the Russian Federation. I knew it was not a good place to stay, but we did not have a choice. We had an appointment to meet Nigel Chandler, a freelance cameraman who was selling his pictures to the BBC. He had been living in cellars and shell holes with Chechen fighters for days and relying on us for a lift out. I did not want to abandon him, and we needed his material. We got busy. There was plenty to do, Chechens to interview, burning buildings to film, the sound of shelling was constant, but every now and then a shell landed a little too close to ignore, whooshing in and exploding with a great crash. I stayed talking to a group of Chechen fighters, while the crew moved a couple of 100 yards to the other side of the square, where fighters were warming themselves in a ruptured overground gas main that was on fire. It was giving off enough heat to melt the snow around it. It is not safe to spend too long next to ignited gas belching from a broken pipe. If a gas main was flaring in London, they would evacuate the street and the one next to it. But a Minnetonka Square was so dangerous that day that a gas leak just wasn't worth worrying about. As well as being a meeting place for journalists, Minnetonka Square was also the place where Chechen fighters formed up into little groups, tramping through the snow or racing around in pock-marked ladders with smashed windscreens. That made it a target. It was not a place to just hang around. But Nigel still hadn't turned up, and we could not leave without him. I started to wonder what the crew was doing. They took it in turns to take the pictures. That day, Steve Littlewood was filming and Scott Hillier was doing sound. They are both expert cameramen, Australians who are great company. When the bridge on the way into Crossley between Dagestan and Chechnya was blown up, the only way around was to take a long drive along the muddy bank of a river in a slow-moving line of larders to get to another crossing. But Steve had another idea. Mate, we'll just drive through it. The river? You're joking. I didn't like the thought of 100,000 pounds worth of armoured Land Rover drowning in a Chechen river with us in it. I got out and walked doubtfully down the river, which was only about 30 feet wide, but looked dark, freezing and deep. I picked up some stones and lobbed them, wondering irrationally if I could tell whether we could make it from the plot they made. Steve leaned out of the driver's side. For feck's sake, just get in. As I slammed the door, he reversed a couple of yards back, gunned the engine and drove straight into the river. The water covered the bonnet and broke over the windscreen, but by then we were through. Piece of cake, mate, Steve said naturally. Go hard or go home. What kind of prommy stuff were you doing with those stones? In Minute Square it was freezing cold. A thick coat, heavy boots and thermal underwear were not helping much. I left the Chechen fighters I'd been talking to and jogged across the square towards the flaming gas main, looking for Steve and Scott, and wanting to get in the wall next to the fire. Something in my brain was thinking about the danger, although I was calm. I looked at the street and tried to work out what to do if there was another airstrike. A low wall nearby, a bit higher than a curbstone, looked like the best cover. It wasn't much. The Crossley city planners who had laid out the square in the Soviet days had created a nice flat expanse of concrete. I could see the crew filming the Chechens who were squatting and standing cheerily around the fiery gas main, stamping their feet and rubbing their hands, and then I heard the scream of jet engines. I jerked my head to left and saw two Russian warplanes, very close to each other, skimming over the rooftops around the square. I threw myself down next to the flat next to the wall I had spotted, which was about a foot high, and pressed my body into the hard, cold concrete. Explosions pumped across the square. I pushed my nose into the snow and put my hands over my head, trying to cover the space between the bottom of my helmet and the collar of my flak jacket. It only went on for a few seconds, but there seemed to be a lot of time to think. This time it's really happening, Jeremy. This is it. You've really done this time. Any second now, you're going to be dead or badly hurt. I forced myself down flat on the ground and braced myself, lying there, waiting for the fragments of bombs to rip me up. The explosions were very loud. I hoped the shrapnel wouldn't hit my flak jacket, which had heavy plates made of carbon fibre. The front one, with all my weight on it, was cutting into my chest, but the back plate suddenly did not feel wide enough. Then the explosion stopped. To my amazement, I wasn't hurt. I ran towards Steve and Scott, who got up from where they had thrown themselves and were coming back to me, shouting something about getting under cover. Nearest building was a ruined shop. I grabbed the tripod and followed them. Scott is an athletic little guy, and he was the fastest. He ran straight at the remains of a plate glass window and threw himself at it. He chested away the shards of glass with the front of his flak jacket as he went through, and he rolled over back onto his feet on the other side. His move was very impressive. Steve and I had a Keystones cop moment, trying to get in through the door at the same time. I got the tripod tangled up with both of us. My heart was beating very hard. All three of us were shaken because we knew how close we had come to being killed. Apart from a cut on my leg, which I had landed on the ground, we were fine. Scott didn't even have a scratch on it from his heroic dive through the window. After a few minutes panting and swearing, we went down to a cellar next door. We waited for the planes to come back. My mouth felt like it was something dead inside, so I kept spitting. We kept saying, F, that was close. F, B, F. 10 minutes or so later, the planes hadn't reappeared, so we went outside. On the other side of the square, where I'd been talking to Chechens, a small group of them had gathered round the body. They were tying a green martyr's ribbon around the head of one of the younger ones, who was dead. I remembered him talking and smiling before the raid. They were calm and full of resolve about the war. A little while later, Nigel turned up. He smelled like a fox after his time in smoky, fetid basements. He was a driven man, who I had met the year before during the siege of Mustar. We had used some of his pictures then. He seemed to have no fear at all, and would push right up into the hardest places, but this time he had been rocked by what he had seen. He told me he had been in a building right in the centre of Grozny, Chechen fighters, as the Russian troops fought their way into the floor upstairs. He thought he was about to get killed or captured, so he cut up his credit cards, presumably thought the Russians making a profit out of his death. When he ran across the big open square near the Parliament with some Chechen fighters, the man in front of him was hit and fell down dead. Nigel was subdued and very tired. The rest of us, Grozny day trippers, were elated and out of control. We swigged from a bottle of whiskey, La Frog, as we limped out of Grozny in the armoured Land Rover. It had dozens of small pieces of shrapnel in it from the airstrike. None of them had got through the carbon fibre armour, like the flak jackets, only thicker, around the passenger compartment, or through the armour glass in the windows. But the metal covering the engine was not reinforced, and the radiator was pierced. A couple of miles outside the city centre, when with the engine boiling up nicely, we found a garage that was open. They patched us up, and we went back to Dagestan. Boarding river again, merry and hysterical. We were sharing tapes with ITN, an idea that was supposed to maximise safety and minimise competition. Steve's camera had been running throughout the attack, so we had some frightening video of what happened. From the series of rapid explosions over a couple of seconds, we deduced that the square had been attacked with cluster bombs. I passed on a dub of the tape to the ITN correspondent, Julian Mannion. He did not have much to show for his day's labours and looked to me a bit jealous that we had been in an airstrike and he hadn't. BBC version of the story was perhaps too low key. Maybe I was trying too hard to demonstrate that the people of Grozny, not the reporters, were the story. But Mannion's version made the most of every crash, bang and wallop of the tape. His script was not complimentary. A BBC crew got caught in a cluster bomb attack in Grozny. The result, sheer panic. He gloated over the pictures of us running like hell. Nice piece, Jeremy, said the foreign editor, Jenny Baxter, over the phone from London. But Mannion's was great. Where did he get his video? Couldn't you make it more like Mannion's, more dramatic? I explained where the pictures came from, and on the main news that night we tarted it up, wallowing in our own drama. Even in the UK, the news is about ratings. Scott, BBC Armoured Land Rovers. Not the only time when the journalists have had better equipment than the forces they are accompanying. BBC Armoured Land Rovers. Not the only time when journalists have had better equipment than their forces they are accompanying. In Afghanistan, the troops regularly rang the HQ on the embedded journalists' sat phones because the radios didn't work in the mountains. Constantinople, hello. Carmen, £5 says when sharing a fob with a journalist, fob with a journalist, nick their vehicles on occasion or radios, as when it's life or death, details get ignored. Probably. Jack, warning, a long link, Google Translate, Russian armoured officer diary from First War. Originally, of course, in Russian. Ooh, cool. Third squad. Khan, if you mean the soldiers borrowed the armoured carrier or hung out Land Rover, I'm not sure. I doubt it, though, as it would put the press at a great deal of risk if it were used as a cover for soldiers. And also, honestly, it would cause a whole lot of problems. And the journalists would make a huge stink. Calvin Gasper. Reed Square getting hit by a cluster bomb. Not that the Soviet-Russian habit of unloading huge EB-57mm rocket blocks would have made much difference. No, it honestly wouldn't have. Russians have a lot of weapons which are very, very good for urban warfare, if you don't care about the number of casualties you're going to cause. Oh, I really do. Oh. So what should we go next? Ooh, this one. Harry Patch, The Last Fighting Tommy. The life of Harry Patch, the last veteran of the trenches, who lived 1898 to 2009. Still have to walk the fluffy research assistant this evening. That's going to be fun. Hopefully I'll wake up for that. Sorry if I'm a bit subdued, Judge normally thing. Said, I wasn't expecting to have to spend... It must have been nigh on 7 hours out in the cold building today, but... I said, builders have seemed to have decided not to come finish the job. This is Passchendaele, 1917. I'm told we attacked on the 16th of August, but the date doesn't mean much to me. I know it's some 6 weeks before I was wounded, so I suppose the middle of August is about right. I remember the names. Pilcombe Ridge was one, and the other was Langemark. But it is such a long time ago that I can't quite connect them up in my head. How are we to know that a pile of rubble was this village or that a gentle slope was a particular ridge, let alone what was going on across the front? You only knew what was right next to you, and even this was often obscured by smoke and fire. Strategy we left to those higher up. We were only warned to be quiet as we moved up, as this would be a surprise attack and the enemy were not to know that we were there. A and C companies were assault companies, so I assumed B and D were in support. Ahead of us, 2 battalions in the division were to undertake the first advance, and we would follow on. In the early hours of the morning, we prepared to move off. I have a memory of crossing a flooded stream. It wasn't very wide, and I have since been told it was the Steenbach. There were a number of trees there, like beanstalks. No leaves or branches, they were just smashed to pieces, or toppled into the stream. To my right, about 30 yards away, there was a little bridge that had been blown up, so instead the Royal Engineers had fixed up some canvas-covered pontoons, 3 or 4 feet wide. However, one of them broke loose and began floating away, and there was a scramble to get it back and anchor it sufficiently so we could cross. We went over in single file, the pontoon rocking from side to side. I can see it now. Beside us in the dawn lights, the artillery was getting a couple of light field guns over to shell the German support lines, I guess. Our guns opening bombardment had begun with an almighty clap of thunder. You can't describe the noise. You can't. But it was enough to take your breath away. It was ferocious. And much of it was dropping not that far ahead of us as the barrage crept forward and the infantry behind. There was an officer going down the line. I say a line, we were effectively in the open. He had his drawn revolver, and I got a distinct impression by the set look of his face that anybody that didn't go over would be shot for cowardice where they stood. On the far side of the flooded stream, we assembled. There was a look of apprehension in everyone's eyes, and horror in a few. There was white tape laid there, so we knew where to stand and in which direction we were expected to go. Otherwise we might wander off course or fall into a shell hole. They were virtually lip to lip. I saw an officer at this time. He came along unravelling and putting down white tape. We saw him for about 10 minutes before he moved on. He just laid it on the ground from one shell hole to another. It wasn't pinned down. We now waited for the whistle to blow. The officer Harry saw was almost certainly Major Percy Norman, Military Cross, of the 84th Field Company of Royal Engineers. Mechanical engineer from Taunton, he enlisted in October 1914 and embarked for France when the 20th Division was sent overseas. He was commended in the Division of War History for completing the very hazardous task of laying tapes under severe fire. Norman and the men under his command laid 600 yards of tape, including 125 yards east of Stenbeck, from where the 7th DCLI commenced their advance. Harry was pleased to hear that Major Norman survived not only the attack, but indeed the war. Frankly, the amount of engineers who do survive the war suggests that God definitely is an engineer. During the initial fighting, German resistance had proved sporadic and confused. This was due at least in part to the fact that the exhausted garrison defending Langemarck was in the process of being relieved by fresh troops as the attack was launched. One large pillbox in the ruins of an abandoned farm held out for up to half an hour, long enough to threaten the pace of the advance, but this resistance too gave way, and very soon streams of prisoners, as many as 150, were seen stumbling towards the waiting men of the DCLI. Fearing that they would disorganize his formation, the commanding officer pointed the prisoners in the direction of the railway, the banks of which would give some protection. They were only too ready to go and needed no escort, wrote the CEO after the battle. The first objective was taken at 5:40 a.m., less than an hour after the attack commenced. 5 minutes later, at 5:45, and now broad daylight, the 7th DCLI was ordered forward, passing through the destroyed buildings of Langemarck to a position identified by a single poplar tree on the horizon. It was just shell holes. And the team made its way forward in a line. It was absolutely sickening to see your own dead and wounded, some calling for stretcher bearers, others semi-conscious and beyond all help, and the German wounded lying about too, and you couldn't stop to help them. I saw one German, I should think he'd been dead some time, well, the shell had hit him, and all his side and his back were ripped up, and his stomach was out on the floor, a horrible sight. Others were just blown to pieces. It wasn't a case of seeing them with a nice bullet hole in their tunic, far from it, and there I was, only 19 years old. I felt sick. The ground remained sodden and cloying, with shell holes half full of putrid water. Keeping any formation was impossible, and the men were allowed to proceed in any way they could. They crossed their first objective, coming across groups of KOLIs. KOI Light Infantry? I don't know what the KOI stands for. Digging along the remains of a hedgerow. The KOI's members were badly depleted, but they had reached and secured their second objective, the Green Line. It was now shortly after 6 a.m., and DCLI halted amongst their comrades, while the British artillery barrage pulverized the ground ahead for well over an hour. At 7:15, the barrage became intense. Then at 7:20, it began once more to creep over the German-held ground ahead. Company officers now ordered the two leading companies to move forward. C and A companies of the DCLI passed through the coalesce, pressing the attack to the red line in two ways, with another company B in support. I can recall a large pond that we went round. Here and there, dotted around the landscape, there were concrete blockhouses, which had caused a lot of damage amongst the first waves, but which had, for the most part, now been taken. As we pushed forward, we got mixed up with some Somersets, who had been attacking to our right, and were busy mopping up any resistance. Some German prisoners were going across. They had been pointed in our direction. One was still carrying a Maxim machine gun, which I suppose he'd been ordered to take with him, as no one else was armed that I can recall. They looked tired and dishevelled from what you expect them to look like after 4 days of front. We didn't feel sorry for them. Why should they? They were out of it. We had to carry on. Came across a lad from A Company. He was ripped apart open from his shoulder to his waist by shrapnel, and lying in a pool of blood. When we got to him, he looked at us and said, "Shoot me." He was beyond all human help, and before we could draw a revolver, he was dead. The final word he uttered was "Mother." I was with him in the last seconds of his life. It wasn't a cry of despair, it was a cry of surprise and joy. I think, although I wasn't allowed to see her, I am sure his mother was in the next world to welcome him, and he knew it. I was just allowed to see that much, and no more. Yes, I'm positive that when he left this world, wherever he went, his mother was there, and from that day I've always remembered that cry, and that death is not the end. I remember that lad in particular. It is an image that has haunted me all my life, seared into my mind. But you saw plenty of people wounded, crying for help, but of course you daren't stop. For one, you didn't have the medical knowledge to help them, and for another, you didn't have the time. Your orders were to press on and support the infantry. Bob, our number one, was already forging ahead. I had wanted to go to the lad's tunic and find his identity disc, his name and his number. I would have written to his people, but Bob wouldn't wait, and with me having the spare parts of the Lewis gun, I had no option but to follow on. The barrage held for a while, then after about half an hour it moved forward. We advanced behind it, hoping that no shell would stop short. It was up to the DCLI to reach the final objective. Resistance was lighter than expected, and as many Germans fell back or ran in confusion, the majority of casualties suffered from machine gun fire, and over 80 prisoners were taken. In a little more than half an hour, the attacking waves reached the Red Line. By 10:30 a.m., Brigade Headquarters had received reports by pigeon. The DCLI were consolidating the position and were in touch with the battalions on their flanks. Any barbed wire had been flattened out by the terrific barrage, and by the time we reached the German first line, as clear as it was the second when we got there. We came down into a traverse from which two communication trenches led back to their reserve line, where our lads were fighting. It was our job, if anything happened, to cover them with the Lewis guns. The fighting was hand to hand, but they were so mixed up that we couldn't use the Lewis gun. You'd have killed as many of your own as you would Germans. At one point, I knew that Bob was flat on the ground, his hands employed the Lewis gun. I would lie down on one side of him, and as he finished firing, the finger of my right hand would be on the receptor. As I pressed it in, releasing the empty pannier, I lifted it off just as my left hand pressed the new pannier on. I then passed the empty pannier back to number 3, and he would pass it back to number 4 and number 5, and they would reload it and pass it up to me, to my left hand. It was a cyclical action between all 5 of us, and all the time as the machine gun fired, it got hotter and hotter to the point where it became difficult to hold. I just changed the magazine on it, and Bob was looking elsewhere in the support line when 2 or 3 Germans came out of the trench, and one of them spotted the machine gun and came straight for us with rifle and bayonet. Now, we were all lying down, under cover, behind a dead German, to tell you the truth, and he must have seen us because he came towards us with a fixed bayonet. He couldn't have had any ammunition in the rifle, otherwise he would have shot us. My right hand was free. I just changed the magazine. I drew my revolver, and I shot him in the right shoulder. He dropped the rifle, but he came stumbling on, no doubt to kick the gun in the mud and us to pieces if he could. It would have taken us half an hour to get it working again if he had. I had 4 seconds to make my mind up. I had 3 rounds in the revolver. I could have killed him with my first. I was a crack shot. But what should I do? Seconds to make my mind? Cornishman's mother was ringing in my ears, and I thought, no, I can't kill him. And I gave him his life. I shot him above the ankle and above the knee. I brought him down. He called out something to me in German. I don't suppose it's complimentary, but for him the war was over. He'll be picking up by stretcher bearers, interrogated and passed on back to a prisoner of war camp. And at the end of the war, he would rejoin his family. Perhaps he was married, perhaps he had children. I've often wondered since if any of those 3 shots made him lose an arm or a leg, and I've often wondered whether he realised that I gave him his life. He was no more than 15 yards away when I shot him. I couldn't miss, not with a Webley service revolver, not at that range. Dirk's got Kingzone, KOI, Kingzone Irish Hussars. It's KOI, so I think it's Kingzone Yeomanry. I presume. But, Let's see, Dirt Squad. Journalists would make a huge stink because they'd start being actively targeted as soldiers if it became known that they were driving around in the press vehicles. Yep. Vision. The Economist had an article on sheds in the UK. A big factor is people want home offices. Yes, it has become a very big factor. That's what we're getting ours for. It is much better. I have to say, I've had a lot of trouble with not so much with the mental health side, but with the getting the sleep side, because this is my bedroom and my office. And I come in here at night after I've maybe taken a few hours off to watch some television or eat some food, and the work's just sitting in front of me. And so I start it, and Go on. Lovely to hear about that, Joan, midway through my dinner.
Well, just be lucky you've had dinner. Vision. English mealtimes make little sense to Americans. You're like hobbits for second breakfast. Okay, in Britain, there is breakfast, brunch, lunch, tea, dinner, supper. Plus, there are snacks, and there's also something called 11s, which you can have at any other point, really, other than you often don't have at 11. Oh, KOI could be King's Own Yorkshire Light Infantry. Yes, it could be. It is a good book. It's The Last Fighting Tommy. It's by Harry Patch with Richard Van Emden writing it, helping him put together. And Harry got to 111. You think about that. He was 16 years old when World War I began. Dinner there. What about second breakfast? We call that brunch. Vision, if I ever make it big, I'll have to buy a shed. Hard to work at kitchen table in a house with your parents and sister. Well, to be fair, me and my sister are getting the shed between us. We're getting two. We're getting one building but two offices because it's being divided into two. As usual. Strauss, did you know any World War I vets? My dad's father and quite a lot of my own family, my mum's side of the family, fought in World War I, but I actually didn't meet any of them. There were a couple who lived on my road when I was younger, but they were all had gone before I was old enough really to talk to them much about it. World War II vets, I knew a fair number of them, and yeah. Ooh. It's cold. I'm still. It's a funny thing. As I said, didn't feel cold working and doing the building work out there, but I do feel cold now. Get it warming up. Really strange, but it's not something I haven't experienced before, so I kind of guessed it was coming my way. Yep. I could go for those two, but this is the fun thing with not having uploaded one. Those are books I've read before, but I do have other books, and one of the things with doing all the work I've been doing is getting other books out. And I have a book here which, if Jamie knew I had it, he would probably be hunting me down. They gave me a Seafire by Commander R. Mike Crossley, DSC RNN. It's an Air Life classic. It was published in first published in 1986. This edition published in 2001. And it's the sort of book which doesn't really believe in a lot of white space.
It's quite dense, quite small writing, but it's still worth it. I don't think there is an audiobook version of it. There are various things in there. And let's see. There's even pictures of the pilot crashing his Seafire into the barrier aboard HMS Indefatigable. No, Implacable. It was Indefatigable. He was the one he managed to rip the wheels off his aircraft. It was on Implacable he crashed into the barrier and actually didn't only rip the propeller off the aircraft. Seriously, we lost more Seafires due to landing on a carrier than we did to combat, I swear. Because the t-shirt, maybe put a jumper on. I don't want to put a jumper on because that will just keep the fibers, that stuff close to my skin. There's Scott. You missed afternoon tea. No, I mentioned tea, but you can of course have afternoon tea and high tea. There's Scott. The King's Own Yorkshire Light Infantry, 4th and 5th Battalions Reservists, serving in France 1917-18, so around the right time and place for the book you just read. Yeah, probably. Oh, that's the thing. I was wearing... I wasn't really wearing a jumper. Yeah. Vision. My grandfather was World War II US Army vet who landed in England fighting in France and Germany as a machine gunner and cook. Was shot, lost 2/3 of his lungs, never spoke at war to me as a kid. Well, losing 2/3 of his lungs... I'm not going to make a joke about him finding it hard to speak, but that's probably going to be an experience he doesn't want to remember too much. Rapid raceback. Landing on a carrier is inherently dangerous. Yes, which is why, to several people's not surprise, how do I put it? The idea of putting conformal fuel tanks on aircraft which are doing carrier landings has proved not to be a viable system. If you're trying to get warm, floppy research assistants are excellent. They are. I have been calling out, and I'm wondering if the Tafra will turn up. By September 1944, we were more than ready to embark in the huge Implacable, but first she had to have her baptism of fire. Seafires from 24 Wing, Lieutenant Commander Wigington, DSC, RMVR, with 894 and 887 squadrons. They and 1771 squadron of 14 Fireflies raided Norwegian leads near Bodø. They sank U-1061 on the way. One Firefly was hacked down. It was recently dug up and placed in a Norwegian museum. During this operation, Implacable's new flight deck party, the 50 ratings organised by Lieutenant Commander Flying for the movement of the aircraft flight deck, had their first Seafire incident. It had made them nervous. One of 887's squadron, Seafire L2Cs, had leapt the barrier and had landed full nose into the forward deck of part of 20 other aircraft. In the resulting fire, its 20mm cannon ammunition had cooked off and shot up several more aircraft. There were many casualties. Number 24 Wing flew south after this workup operation and finally embarked in their own ship on 30th October. Bound for the Indian Ocean, Pallenberg, January, and Okinawa, March 1945. We ourselves embarked on Implacable, Captain Charles Hugh Halliot, who had just relieved my old Eagle captain, Mackintosh of Mackintosh, on 8th of November, and received a superb welcome. My diary reads, made a reasonable show except for the start-up at Skibarry. We had to do this pilots only, as the crews had already gone on board and the RAF were unable to help. We had to unlatch and push out, of course. The main trouble was having only one trolley, a half-ton 12-volt accumulator on wheels, amongst 14 aircraft. However, red, mine, and blue, Simpson's flights, landed on without fuss in 3 minutes and 20 seconds, which is very nearly a record. Norman followed with the 6 remaining aircraft, also without a hiccup. Unfortunately, in their second practice sortie, 801 managed to prang our D and their R. This was very unpopular, as squadrons did not like using each other's aircraft. Luckily, we again had no accidents and managed to land 12 aircraft in 5 minutes flat. The third range of the day was cancelled, as Implacable's windshield hydraulics went for the Burton, and also some of the arrestor wires would not reset. Commander Charles Evans, our commander flying, had recently returned from Quonset, USA, where he'd been organising the working up of new Fleet Air Arm F4EU Corsair squadrons for the Pacific. He may have been a little disconcerted finding his new ship, Implacables, to have such a large number of Seafires. He soon made it clear to us that he thought that we were in the best in the world, or shortly would be, under his guidance. He always appeared to be in command, even when the captain was on the bridge, and particularly when flying was in progress. He would brook no criticism by non-flying admirals. He would reply to their signals, which were usually asking pointed questions such as what is the delay, or what was that pilot's name, in a cool choice of words, which would remind the Admiral that Implacable had twice their number of aircraft to land and was already doing so at half their accident rate and even half their time. As a result, we would do anything for Charles Evans. He had arranged no flying for the next day. The ship was testing her degaussing. This was an electromagnetic arrangement of wires around the ship, they're carrying many thousands of amps in order to reduce the magnetic signature of the entire ship to zero in case she passed over enemy magnetic mines. This meant that we could gather in the wardroom that night and have a few beers and get to know the ship's officers. There are 120 of us airmen and only 40 of them, so we managed to get many of them, including the Padre, into a receptive state of mind by bar closing time. They were already learning the words of several of our filthy songs. Several of us surfaced next morning early enough to finish reading several large tomes of orders. Charles Evans' flying orders started off, the difficult we will do at once, the impossible may take a little longer. The thus Implacable was called HMS Impossible from that time onwards. At sea, life aboard was like some overcrowded spaceship, everything in a state of crisis but seldom falling apart. One of the first impossible things that Charles Evans suggested that I and my squadron to do was to carry out some harbour deck landing practice. As he had not asked 801, we were proud to have a go. I had had the experience of harbour deck landings in Bitter and thought I knew the snags. As we set off, there was a 40-knot wind whistling around the island on deck and squalls of rain were over the hills surrounding Scapa Flow. After taking off, the joy of flying over the flagship at 0 feet was cut short by a searchlight from Implacable giving us the F for land on now. I had warned the pilots not to land if the ship was swinging out of the wind. This annoyed the batsman. He was a personality batsman. This was the new type of batsman who must have done a course of theatricals at RADA. He took it far too seriously, throwing himself all over the deck. His body contorted with signals several at a time. If in the midst of one of these extravagant outgoing gestures, the pilots would open the throttle smoothly and go round again, making a V sign as he passed a few feet away, while he could expect a trouble when he landed. It was my fault. I should have warned the batsman, Lieutenant A. Trevor David, RNVR, but he was really the most charming man and later became a flight deck officer. But there never seemed enough time for good manners in Implacable. We had as our Lieutenant Commander flying none other than Charles Lamb, DSO, DSC, RN. Of course, we realised that he must have done something to get the 2 gongs that he had, but we had to wait until after the war to read his book War in a String Bag to get the full unbelievable story. He led his flight deck party with a mixture of terror, kindness, example, and pugilistic prowess. They were a very tough crowd indeed, and as everything tended to be their fault when there was a balls up, which there usually was, they and Charles Lamb would often be seen giving each other the treatment. If he had asked them, however, they would have knowingly followed him into hell. He was that sort of man. Implacable had originally been designed to take only a little more than half the 78 aircraft that she would shortly have to accommodate in her 2 hangars. No guns or other impedimenta had been removed, so to compensate for the extra space now to be taken up by the extra hangar. With 500 extra crew, she was grossly overcrowded. When 880 and 801, with 828 and 18 Barracudas and 171771 12 Fireflies arrived, the squadron's ratings had to take potluck with the leftover mess decks. The initial result was that most of our squadrons were having to sling their hammocks in the passageways. These were in use day and night, and our men were being bumped by people trying to get by and were losing their sleep. Many of the more junior officers in the ship had to treble up. As all of us, AR and VR boys, were mostly junior of all, we got a particularly poor choice. I had the deepest, noisiest, and least ventilated cabin the builders could have devised. It was 3 decks down and over the starboard outer screw. Still, it was at least mine own, and there was plenty of room to spread out. On 21st November 1944, we set off for Norway again, with a company with 2 Wolof carriers, Trumpeter and Pursuer. This, we thought, was in the nature of a workup exercise for Implacable, before she and ourselves went out to the Far East to fight the Japs. The diary reports, Implacable with 2 banana boats, stayed out of sight and sound of the Norwegian coast for the next 3 days, waiting for a window in the weather. It had been blowing a 70-knot gale, 23rd of November, and that was as good as saying goodbye to the 2 banana boats. One's flight deck began to bend in the middle and unpeeled. The other, Pursuer, had trouble in her hangar, most of her aircraft breaking loose and ramming each other. We think there may be a shipping strike tomorrow. We in 801 might be allowed to shoot up all the airfield, and if there's nothing more there, to find something near Trondheim. It's a good book. It is. It's a good book. Let's see. Calvin, we have one family member who won a VC who served with the Desert Rats. A few passed by in draft as UK as coal miners. Oh, cool. Lucky for them. Although mining coals is never that good. That's always a nasty job. Hello, Jack Hunter. Rapid Raceback. I've never heard good things about the Seafire. On the other hand, never heard anything bad. The thing is, the Seafire is a lovely air. The pilots are very loyal to them. The pilots are very loyal to them because once in the air, they are very good planes. It's the landing which worries me with them. Vision, most combat vets I've known were in Vietnam. My uncle was a US Navy Seabee. His 2 sons became US Marines. Oh. Well, you know, as they fought in Iraq and Afghanistan, I'm sure he didn't disown them. But I do realise the great divide that is between the Seabees and the Marines. Hello, Admiral. See when ME1 and 10 almost used conformal tanks. Earliest one I've not liked and slowed an already slow fighter. Yep. Seafire sheds a somewhat different light on Naval's BF-109T, which is supposed to have larger wings than the BF-109 email. Yeah, don't get started on it. Vision. Personality Batman. Several noted actors were batsmen in World War II. Yes, they were. It's quite weird how many of them go to it. Vision. Does the British Army military still have batsmen? Okay, so batsmen. There are some different ones. If you're in the army, batsman is you're someone who takes care of your clothes, etc., and things. In the Navy, you have stewards, and I think the Air Force, I can't remember what they're called as well, but the Navy, it's basically the commander of the ship will have a personal steward, as well as their regular, who will excuse some of the normal stewarding duties to look after the captain and make sure the captain eats. But otherwise, the stewards are they look after cooks and they're sort of looking after the housekeeping of the whole ship, making sure that works. So they still do have stewards, yes. And then, of course, batsmen are the officers who are landing people in the Royal Navy. Come on, what's the CB? Well, CBs are highly specialized personnel. Basically, they're constructors who the US Navy can land anywhere and will build whatever they need. And they are responsible for a lot of the success in the Pacific War in World War II because they built all the infrastructure behind them. Often going into places which hadn't yet been quelled, and often with their own guns. And there are a fairly large number of stories of US Marines surrendering, going, we've won this island, and the CB spending at least 2 weeks fighting while they're building the stuff because of people coming in. And it basically often the CBs would go, yeah, Marines win the island, then we make sure to control it. I guess it needs an extroverted personality type. Oh, it does. For being a Batman, it does. Hello, Crazy Locks. Got here late. What's the name of the new pen and sword book? Blind and on mobile. Wow. Okay. A, thank you for being here. B, the new pen and sword book. Mediterranean Naval Battles That Changed the World by Quentin Russel. It's a good one. And then we did Jeremy Bowen's War Stories. Then Johnson Beharry, Barefoot Soldier. Then Nick Vaux's March to the South Atlantic, 4-2 Commando Royal Marines in the Falklands War. And finally, we have done They Gave Me a Seafire, Commander R. Mike Crossley. Dear CRM. That's good. I think it comes from CB, Construction Battalion, but as the words CB, yes. And if I remember correctly, their symbol is a bee, a bumblebee, over the sea, or surrounded by sea. Oh, is it? Okay. I find it mildly humorous. Senior officers need someone who makes sure they eat and sleep. Well, actually, think about it from the perspective of the Navy. In normal times, possibly you don't. But if you're in a high-intensity combat period, the commander and the executive officer and the senior officers running the ship will probably be wanting to be on duty as much as they can. They'll be living in the CIC or the bridge. They'll be constantly going and constantly doing decisions. In other words, they've got more important things to do with their time than to going and getting food elsewhere. And if you consider in the Royal Navy, they go to the effort of making sure that they have a special cabin for the captain as close to the bridge as physically possible. So that if there is a requirement for the captain to be on the bridge, the captain can be woken up and be on the bridge. And the senior executive officer isn't that far away as well, for similar reasons. Then you understand that if they're prepared to go to that much cost and design to do that, do they really want that person then going all the way down to the mess decks to get their food on a regular basis? Unless it's a special occasion, or less, especially when they're on duty, or when it's a crisis? No, they don't. They want them in the CIC, they want them in the bridge. They want them in the CIC, they want them on the bridge. They do not want them going down there. So you have someone whose job it is to make sure, sir, have you eaten? I'm in the middle of this. Don't worry, sir. Food will be arriving very quickly. And they become one of the most important people. There are literally 2 people on a ship. Possibly 3. But 2 whose official roles it is to oversee the captain's welfare. The chief medical officer and the captain's steward. To make sure the captain is functioning at their full efficiency. And if this one, quiet words do not get through to the captain and do not make them take hints and start taking care of herself, then they tend to go and talk to the chief medical officer, who will then come and order the captain to go and get some sleep. Because that's the only person who can order the captain to go get some sleep. Nick Waters, an RN chap I knew wasn't a steward, was told no shore leave until the captain's coffee machine was fixed. Shortly after it worked, but mysteriously, the one in junior officer's mess didn't. That's good. I've heard stories of CBs being the first on the beach, fighting the beach defences while clearing out the obstacles to allow everyone else to land there too. Oh yes, they've done some fun things in their time, the construction battalions. Cool, Bijon. You got lots of CB hats. My CB uncle built an airbase in Vietnam and dodged mortar shells and became a senior chief of the motorball U.S. forces in Taiwan, where he married my aunt. Gave me lots of kids as a kid, lots of CB hats. Cool. I was asking. A bumblebee with a wrench, hammer, and Tommy gun. Cool. It's actually a bumblebee with a tool belt and Tommy gun, if memory serves. If I remember correctly, it's a bumblebee, and I know, but it's kind of like, I remember there was one version I saw once, which was the bumblebee, which did have the tool belt and the Tommy gun. I do remember that was on the bumblebee now, you mention it. But it had wavy lines, like this particular symbol, or this Bruships, this one provided by Daniel Freeman. This is, of course, the Drac icon, and this is the Daniel Freeman icon. Made for my channel, so thank you very much to both of them. Grossalty, third is XO. No, the third is the chief of the ship, the senior petty officer. The XO's job is to watch the crew and look after the crew below. The XO looks down. The captain looks down and checks on the XO. There are only certain people who are allowed to look up to the captain, whose jobs it is to look up the captain, and they're out of the chain command, because usually you take care of the people below you. That's what a good captain steward doesn't ask when the captain last ate, but greets the captain with a sandwich on the plate with the words, "Sandwich, sir?" Yes. Although I know, it's going to sound strange. I spent a bit of time on Navy ships in my time, especially RM ones, and I know one steward who worked out that his captain had a bit of a sweet tooth. And so what he'd do, instead of a sandwich, it would be waffles, bacon, and maple syrup would appear. And this is a British ship. And basically he found that the sandwich his captain would eat like one bit of. But the waffles with bacon and maple syrup, all of it would go. And he thought, well, frankly, that's the same calorie count and going to keep him going, so that's what I'll do. So, you know. But the stewards do learn. They get very, very careful about looking after their captains and very protective. It's also a good protection against potentially, you know, if anyone gets on the boat and on the ship and tries to poison the captain or does anything like that, well, the captain's food is separate and is watched the whole way. And the stewards are usually, it's one of the few roles which still has a lot of personal in it, in that there was this good example on the Queen Elizabeth Carrier program. As I understand it, the steward who was assigned to Jerry Kidd as captain before he went ended up going to get promoted to admiral, he didn't stay with the next captain. Another steward was assigned.
And as I understood it, but I'm not 100% sure about this story, but he ends up going on to being called up to go and look after Jerry Kidd when Jerry Kidd gets an Operation Admiralty post. He still rates a steward at that point to look after him, and this guy got called to go to transfer to go and make sure, because he had the existing relationship. They do try and keep them. If there's a good relationship between a steward and a senior officer, they try and keep it going. And so the steward can find themselves promoted up equivalently to look after the more senior officer. Because what about chief engineer? That's the XO looking down and checking on them. The captain will make a request of the chief engineer. The executive will check. XO's job is to check if the chief engineer is still functioning as a human being, or well, within the range of a chief engineer. Vision, Scotty doesn't give a damn about Kirk. No, that was his chief engineer's love is his ship, or her ship, and they often complain. If you damage it a lot. Big Waters, I was told the general rule was you get a good captain or a good XO. Very lucky or unlucky that you get both or both bad. The RN's fairly good at getting good pairs and good ones that work together, because often you see, the RN's done a lot of studying over the years of working out what makes a good pairing. And often what you want is a complementary team that works well together, that their skill sets balance each other out. So what you might see, you might have an XO who's very good at the personal leadership style of the force management and the personnel management, and the captain who's very good at the warfare fighting technical side of it. So, but not so good at the ladder. So the two skill sets will balance each other out. Each one's strengths and weaknesses will sort of complement each other to form one combined set. And that's increasingly what the RN has been trying to do for about the last 20, 30 years. Since a certain captain in the Ministry of Defence at the time, not 20, 30 years, it must have been about 45 years ago, Michael Clapp wrote a paper about command, and it seems to have influenced the RN since. Nick Waters. Oh, Thunder Gunman. Now I want waffles. Yeah, you're not the only one. I want waffles as well now. That's what. Yes, I use a sandwich as an example. As you say, a good steward knows what the captain will eat, even when they're too busy to actually realise they're eating as much as they are. One of the stories I have about a steward is literally going from ship to ship, and this was in this was in the Middle East somewhere, and going to Allied ship after ship with bottles of whiskey to get a certain type of biscuits, because the captain would eat those biscuits wherever he put them. And so that would guarantee getting something into the captain. And this was prior to, I think, the first Gulf War. And they were on high alert, watching everything going through. And the captain had been burning through his supply. I think it was it Oreos? It was something like that. And the British don't usually stock them on their ships at the time. So he's getting them off the American ships. And so pretty much, I think the Americans received about 36 bottles of whiskey for goodness knows how many packs of Oreos. But enough to keep the captain going through the operation. Also, one interesting thing is the number of captain stewards who later on to go past their officers' course and get in to become officers. It is one of the interesting things, because a lot of the stewards will be used at. It is just strange, not the official sounding board. The official sounding board is, of course, the XO, but a lot of the stewards
the personal captain steward will be the person the captain sees almost more often than anything. And sometimes, this is one of the reasons why they have to have security clearances as high as they do, but they will get talked to, and they'll talk to them. And the amount of captain stewards who go on to become officers and go to officer training, and it's sort of a case of yes, who are your recommendees? Admiral so and so, Admiral this, and Admiral this. You go, you're a former steward, aren't you? Yes. And basically, 3 senior admirals or more have signed off on this person, have suggested because they've found a good one. And again, they find themselves promoted quite quickly. I could point to a couple who are commanders, and well, after already doing 10 or so years as a steward, they've managed to make full commander after 10 years of being an officer, and that's quite rare. I mean, they've been very much accelerated, let's say, through the junior ranks officer. Rick Vassa of Asava. I made many friends in the field with my French press. Derb Squad. I think a captain steward is a bit like a judge's clerk. They move you around a few. They think you'll get on and work well with. Then you're pretty much with them for their career. Sounds like it. New IKBB 472. I suggesting that chief engineers are not fully human. No, their hearts just pump engine oil. Raposo, which was more important to an RN captain, coffee or tea? Depends on the captain. Usually it's tea, but sometimes it is coffee. Carl Harmon, any stories of captains coming back weighing more after a deployment? Not usually. I haven't heard of them coming back weighing more, but there are a fair number who've come back, and people they've been surprised they haven't weighed a lot less. They usually maintain their weight, and they're surprisingly healthy again. RN cap. It's one of those things I've been looking at, because I found the Americans, as I understand it, don't have a steward system like the British, and I can understand it. The American cultural history, they don't like servants and all these things, and that's what they see it as. But we also did, of course, Harry Patch last night and Tommy today as a book, but it also seems to me that the US Navy might be missing a trick, because it becomes such an important part of the process of maintaining health. Because if you think about it, yes, it's terrible to say, but there really are some people on a ship whose lives are worth more to the running of that ship than others. Your senior petty officers, your senior officers, your XO and your captain and your chief of boat, your chief petty officer, they are your core crew. They are your critical personnel. And if they are not eating right, if they're not looking after themselves because they're so busy doing their jobs, you're going to have a problem. You're going to have the ship break down. So actually having that person who does look after them. And it's another thing you notice also as well. It's going to sound strange. The captain is worried. There are issues going on with the morale of the ship. Now, the stewards will never name names, but they will give the captain a heads up if something's going on. So suddenly you have another informal network going on. You have an officer behaving badly, or a chief petty officer behaving badly, or someone behaving badly, and it gets round to the captain's steward. It will reach the captain quietly. And there have been countless number of times in RN history where that has caused people to have a, well, I wouldn't say a come to Jesus moment, but a come to captain moment. And the come to captain moment is not a fun experience for anyone. Especially if the captain specifically describes it as no biscuits. But also, conversely, The steward will hear if people are working very hard. The captain might not make it out of the bridge or the CIC that much, or will wander around the ship on occasion, so they won't see different things. But the steward will talk with the other stewards, who are all wandering around the ship anyway, doing their duties, and it will get back. And so suddenly someone will get credit, and they'll go, "Ooh, how did I get accommodation? How did I get notice for this?" It gets through. It provides another informal network, and as I said, I think the US Navy misses out a trick on it. Nick Waters, yeah, good and bad, probably not the right way to put it. Yes. Well, you can do. Honestly, you can get good and bad, but you have to sort of work it out. Vision, it's the RO stories that I'm here for. See, my old Navy vet I work with told us swapping ice cream for booze with our in ships in port. Sort of not officially allowed. But for purely medical reasons, of course. Vision. If you believe the films and books, yeomen informally fulfill some of the roles, duties as stewards, batsmen, USN for captains and admirals. They do. But the thing is, that's not their job, whereas for the steward, it literally is their job. Agent, come to captain wearing brown trousers. They probably aren't brown when they go in, because they probably don't realise what they're being called. Because, you see, again, one of the things, again, which I love with the RN, because of the way it's grown up and it's developed over centuries, it has traditional, informal networks of communication. So they have the divisional system, where people can pass up issues to their divisional officer and go higher. They have their own officer, which they're in charge of in their section, or their NCOs. They can technically go to the captain themselves, but there's this informal network which goes up through the stewards. So you suddenly realise that the captain can have an informal way of having people come talk to him, of finding out stuff, or her finding out stuff, and you can have formal ways. And it's balancing the two. And the fact is, it's tradition. So no one dares try to intimidate the captain and steward. There is no quicker way than to piss off your captain than to find the captain to find out their steward's being intimidated. Remember, they spend a lot of time with their steward. They will know when the steward is not running right. And if they detect it very quickly, the captain will go, "What's the problem?" and figure it out. I have only time in my life I've ever seen a Royal Navy captain really, really annoyed was when he figured out someone had tried to intimidate his steward not to tell him something. And the person who did it wasn't in the Navy for very long after that. I mean, literally, it was... And I was just there as an observer, an academic, and I was just chatting away and watching. It wasn't even a case of wait for the civilian to be out of the room. I'm sufficiently annoyed. I don't care there's a civilian in the room. You have just crossed a gigantic black, red, solid line in the sand. And if you cross that line, you will be off my ship. Sort of thing. If the captains ask you personally, do you know until you get in there whether you're going to be getting chewed out or not? If you think he doesn't know, if you think they don't know, then you are very, very silly. Juno and I. So it's like a captain come to moment from Admiral King. Yes, that Admiral King. Probably. The steward mentions officer to the captain. The officer is invited to the captain's wardroom. They arrive and find that there are no tea biscuits, no tea, and a minute taker. It could be worse. It could be a minute taker and the XO. Oh. Can't know how 1-2. Stress can cause you to burn insane amounts of calories. I heard an ex-convict who had such a hard time adapting to life on the outside
that he was eating 4,000 calories a day, and he was still looking at losing weight. Well, USN during World War II, its steward corps was racially segregated. A lot of stewards were black and had separate ranks. Yeah. There is that legacy as well to deal with. Wolf, agreed. I think a lot of our current burnout is people throwing themselves into it and not having someone to look after them. Yeah. I think, Vision, I think that's the problem. I think stewards are seen as a perk by politicians and people who are outside the service. They don't really put themselves in the mindset of, what's this value for money? And let's be honest, time-wise, what is value for money? Having a captain or an NXO who are actually working at their efficiency and capable of doing the jobs they're doing and aren't having to worry about getting food elsewhere, aren't having to worry about this, that, the other, so they can concentrate on their jobs, is probably more useful for you than having them have to keep walking up and down the ship to go and get food and making sure they make appearances at the meal times. And plus, it then also gives the officers a break from having the captain around, because where's the captain going to have to go eat? In the officers' mess. Which means the officers are always going to have to be on their best behaviour. Whereas if they have just the executive officer there, that's just okay. They still have to be well behaved, but it's a lot less pressure than the captain being there. I mean, the captain is the master under God, after all. Stav Thompson, 2 things you never mess with. 1, a captain's pet, and 2, a captain's steward. Yeah, again, it's rare the captain... I think, again, because of the steward system, again, you don't tend to have as many captain's pet... the history of captain's pets in the RN, because you don't have anyone having a value for sucking up to the captain, because for the steward, getting the food for the captain, looking after the captain, is their job. So they're not sucking up, they're doing their job. 10 seconds. Carmen, you just pissed on the guy that keeps me alive and who is practically my best friend on deployment. Be gone, you have no job out of my ship. To an extent, this is it. The other thing, one of the fun things I know about is that there's at least a few captain stewards I know who the captain's wives and they get on very well. They're good friends. And they exchange tricks for managing the husband. I haven't met yet any captain's steward for a female captain, but I wouldn't be surprised if the same dynamic occurred. Because it's basically, how do we look after this person? How do we stop them getting in? How do you remind them to eat? What's your trick? What's your trick? Does he get? Do they always get cantankerous after us? I'm like, yeah. I'll watch them. That's what it's less about intimidating the captain steward. It's probably more about hiding problem. Hiding problem is now how major instances multiple serious casualties happen. Yes, but if you're doing that by intimidating the captain steward, then you've gone from being a twit to being a twit who is, as Carl Harmon pointed out, intimidating and upset and causing trouble for the person who's literally responsible for keeping me alive. So in other words, you're interfering with people outside of your own chain of command and structure. You are, yeah. Gaham, did your message get through? Yes, it did. Most of the Royal Navy still have stewards. I think the Australian one does, and I think the Canadian does. I think they've kept them. Mostly probably because the Royal Navy has them. Still. Represent. Don't know if Paul from Chicago is on today. He's trying to figure out what happened to Dudley North off his tour of Gibraltar. We can't find anything. It's like he was abducted by aliens. Basically, he is accused of being too nice to the French. When he's found innocent of that, though, it's past the point at which he can have a command. So he basically... at a key point at which he could have got his next command and gone on to be involved in the war for a long time, he's having to deal with Cork and Ori's, I don't know, wild wonder sphere. Basically, if you want to single-handedly improve the Royal Navy's performance in World War II, you could do it by removing one man who is far past the prime that he ever had, and then a lot of troubles would disappear. Because A, Norway wouldn't happen in the way it did, because he wouldn't have been mucking around with it. There would have been someone else, anyone else would have been better. And B, he wouldn't have been there to lead an investigation of North, of... who else? The guy who went to command the Indian Ocean and commanded Task Force H, Somerville. Pretty much everything you can think about where there is something really silly that carries on, any sort of, if you can imagine Admiral Cunningham or anyone else seeing that would have gone, go away, end this now, goodbye. He goes, I will investigate with a full force because they must be guilty. And then eventually they're found not guilty and it carries on. But the Royal Navy's lost a good officer for 6 or 9 months. Or in the case of North, they're so long out of the run that by that point, there are other officers coming through and, Vision. One complaint online is how post-Cold War budget cutting led to separate clubs for officers and enlisted being merged to save money. Captain lost drivers on call act. Gemma, then we come to the conclusion that steward is more a surrogate mother to teenager in charge than servant. I'd be tempted to call him actually more almost in some ways, not mother, but spouse or something. In that you have, it's going to sound strange. They take the things that basically they stop the captain having to worry about making sure their clothes are clean, their bed's done, all those things. They take care of all the housekeeping stuff so the captain can concentrate on their job of running the ship. So the person, basically, we've got this person who it costs us a lot less to train to free up the hours of the person who we have spent probably by the time they're in charge of, let's say, an aircraft carrier, millions of pounds in training and investment in. So are worth a huge amount of money to us, and who we want focusing on the jobs which only they can do, because only they have the training, the skills, and the position to do it. So we have that. And again, it's something I noticed which is missing in Star Trek, unless they have magical cleaning things. That's got only 3.5 hours to go to Manchester for the day. No, I think I will be going soon because there is a fluffy research assistant who's asking for a walk. Paul Johnson, considering that most of the officers were upper class, how about Nanny? Again, this is an often projected thing, but honestly, the Royal Navy officers aren't really upper class. It's going to sound strange, they're mostly middle class. and fiercely so. Yes, by the time they become, they are sort of senior admirals, etc., they're often entitled lords, but they often got ennobled for actions in the service. Quite a lot of them are what we call upper middle class rather than upper class in British terms. The US might sell the Captain Steward idea, running as a personal dietetic specialist. Yeah, I might do. Robert Roseback. So, what happens to the steward who is so good at their job they aren't allowed to do anything else? They tend to, as I said, they tend to get promoted up with the officers. With the officer, so they'll go with that officer. If they're very good at looking after them, that officer gets promoted up. And then when that officer goes, they'll either get assigned to another one, or as I said, a fair number of them I know have ended up in officer training school because they've been trained up by that officer. They've met a lot of other senior officers who will recommend them, and they end up, and quite a few of them end up as logistics officers, and some even have gone the warfare officer route and are heading for ship's captains. That's good. You don't want to be paying the captain £70,000 a year to make his bed. No. To be fair, again, captain stewards, a fair number of stewards in the Royal Navy, I know, go on. Stewards are one of those few roles which tend to do quite well. They tend to be people who are very good at multitasking, organisation, and personal interactions, and very personal people. I can off the top of my head name 5 former stewards who are now heads of HR for major companies, and I'm not talking companies with 400, 500. I'm talking companies with thousands of people. I think one of the senior people involved in Google in the UK is a former Royal Navy steward. Again, it's one of those roles. There are a couple of roles in the Royal Navy where you literally go, yes, when you retire from the Navy, you are going to find a job and you're eventually going to have a private helicopter, or you're going to not be poor. It's amazing. It's not necessarily the roles you'd think it was, but again, there's a line in one of the books that they had never met a retired captain steward. They usually end up with their own butlers, and that was from World War II. Benjamin, I've noticed the RN and other Commonwealth navies have far fewer enlisted ranks than the USN. Same for Navy armies too. Reasons? Yes, the US forces are obsessed with the title of specialist. Obsessed. Right, can you think of an admiral who had issues being an admiral because he wanted to be at sea or with their men rather than above them? Well, again, admirals usually... there are a fair number of admirals who didn't like land postings, but most admirals found a way, if they wanted to get to sea still. Cunningham wasn't keen of commanding from land, but he understood he had to. Carl Gosman and naval officers just saw Soviet Alpha class briefings where he stated that the sub had a crew of 20 some officers and half a dozen warrants in a crew of 30 to 32. I think the Alpha has more crew than that. I'm going by the Indian Navy here from memory. No. serious I'm getting the book out. I'm not sure I trust Wikipedia on this one. Mm-hmm. The Alpha class, 5 units, 1998. Complement. C notes, 45. These submarines are highly automated. Western intelligence estimates the Alpha crew is 25 to 45 men. The former is probably more likely, with a very high percentage of officers and warrants, and few, if any, enlisted personnel. Good lord. The Alpha is fitted with a personal rescue sphere provided for the escape of the crew in the event the submarine is disabled. Yep. Well, it's true. Good lord. I didn't realise that. Right, as said, I'll probably go in about 15 minutes. So, let's see. I'm guessing cyber also is another role. I know not necessarily Naval, but still, yes, cyber. But you would expect cyber to earn well because, of course, the computer stuff. No. The roles which tend to do surprisingly well: batsmen, stewards, and this is going to sound strange. Anyone who reached the rank of chief of boat, the chief of ship, the chief petty officer, the senior petty officer of the ship, they all seem to do well. Some often better than some of the officers do. In fact, I know more lieutenant commanders who've ended up not exactly poor, but not exactly rolling in it either, than I do anyone who's filled those 3 roles. Gasberg, Star Trek cleaning, yes. At least the novelization of the first TNG, automatic cleaning and low-level maintenance was detailed. In DS9, O'Brien even joked about it. Yeah. Tom Golding, class system in Britain, holding the Queen's Commission is the ultimate symbol of being in upper class. Used to be, certainly. But still, it's going to be something that sounds something strange, but at certain points, the French always have had a minimum as a tradition for many years of number of officers who have to have come from rating backgrounds. But the RN has never had a minimum, but they've often had a lot, and some years it's had more than others. It's had a lot more than the French at minimum. And the French minimum is also usually tends to be the maximum. Vision, learned a lot today while following lottery. Thank you very much. Have a good evening. Coton Stewards is from Battlecruiser Reliant. Thank you. I thought it was, but I couldn't remember which book it was. But it's very, very true. I do know that experience that much. I have to say, again, gentlemen's clubs in London, and I'm not talking about those of the fruity dancing variety. I'm talking about those of the traditional sort of gentlemen's clubs in London, which, you know, they're basically dining clubs and offices and, you know, almost sort of, how do I put this, almost sort of hotel-like services in London, which you would, you know, belong to, and they'd have rooms you could stay, in, and they would look after your needs, and, you know, you'd always have it. It's currently even Stevens. A number of times I've been in one of those with an admiral, and a number of times I've been in one of those with someone who is a former steward or batsman. And actually, if you add in chief of ship, yeah, probably more times with them. But when I'm saying that is I've been sort of invited along to have a chat with veterans about something, and the veteran's gone, and one of them's gone, oh yes, I will book us into my club, and it's that one who's booked them into the club. And it's that one. It's quite interesting when you're sort of watching these captains going, yes, well, of course, no, sirs, no, sirs, don't worry, I've taken care of the bill. And you're sort of going, but you're the, and they are, okay. Vision. It's the dream of every captain to have his daughter marry a cabinet minister. Mm-hmm. That's good. The Alpha was almost entirely automated in Soviet service. I don't know if the Indian Navy has had the same with that, but it had a very small crew for the size of boat it was. Hmm. Hmm. Well, it's an interesting idea, and honestly, you think if the Soviet Union managed to achieve all that with their level of automation, you wonder why the West haven't tried that with their submarines. Remember, aside from Warspite or any of the tribals, can you think of any warships which went full beast mode when their little friends were messed with? Well, there's HMS Renown chasing Scharnhorst and Eisenhower. That's going full beast mode. There's a few American destroyers which to go full beast mode in certain battles. And I can think of some motor torpedo boats, both in the Pacific and the Channel, which went absolutely absurdly beast mode. I mean, you're talking. I know there was one which wiped out a convoy of E-boats entirely at solo, after the E-boats had sunk a merchant ship and damaged one of its sisters. It was out on a solo patrol, and it just caught them on the way back and went through them and wiped them up. It was a motor gunboat, and it just blasted through the center, going bang, 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 up the middle line of these 6 vessels, I think it was. That's good. The sub was so automated the crew weren't doing things but monitoring systems. The crew didn't have to leave the third compartment for the duration of cruise except for repairs. Mm-hmm. Alright, aside from Warspite or any of the tribals, well, I did that one. Not a wolf. There are so many jokes about why chief petty officers make it better than officers. They're used to managing upwards as well as downwards. That's got possibly, but I've never seen any like that. They are really not like that, and most of them are now. They're open to all to become a member. And honestly, if I had the money, probably I would become a member because the food in them is amazing. If you want someone to go and eat in London, that's the place to go. The beef Wellington in the Reform Club is absolutely amazing. I've had it 3 times in my life, and every time it has been spectacular. So I thought those places had gone by the wayside. No. In fact, they're doing better than ever, many of them. They've always been very happy to take for people with to take anyone who's got the money to join them. Carl Hammond, re-steward booking, not Admiral. Old habits die hard? Probably wouldn't trust. The steward probably wouldn't trust the Admiral to do the booking. The years of looking after this person and making sure they ate properly, wouldn't you trust them with a booking a table? Oh, about 7 minutes. Taffy free, yeah, that's one of the actions definitely where the US destroyers go full beast mode. That's good. It's worth noting that the Soviets and Russians didn't try to go that heavily into automated again and went back to more heavily crewed submarines. Yeah, but you know, it shows what could be done if you're prepared to do it. Carmen Gasper, yes, but that's not really. That's them going on attack. That's not them. You've killed one of my friends. I'm going to wipe you all out. That's just them doing their job. The U-boats going on wreaking havoc at night with deck guns inside a convoy. That's what I was talking about. The other type of gentleman's club. Yeah, no, not my style. Tom Golding, Royal Automobile Club, East Indian Club aren't too expensive. Well worth checking them out. They are lovely, but they don't have the Reform Club's Beef Wellington. So you can guess which club, if I had the money, I'd be a member of. Literally for the Beef Wellington. Oh. Do they serve Iron Brew? Actually, in the Reform Club, I have had Iron Brew. It was quite shocking. They went. I was chatting away, and Fraser, the guy who had booked us all in, very nicely, went, "Ah, yes, Alex, you like Iron Brew, don't you?" I went, "Yes, but I won't have that here. I'll just have a Coke." Turned to the student, "Do you have some Iron Brew?" I think he said Jeffrey, or the guy's name, whatever it was. And the gentleman, the steward went, "Of course, Mr. Fraser's surname." Went, "Yes, we will have that available immediately. Would you like it by the pint or by a small glass?" And looked at one of me and said, "Oh, we'll have a pint. And one for me as well, because I haven't had good Iron Brew in ages." And it was literally... it was before lockdown. It was a pint of this stuff. I do not want to think how much it cost. That's good. Potentially. Tom Gordon, joining a club for the Beef Wellington. Now that is a decision I can truly respect. Oh, yeah. You better start promoting your book like crazy. Probably. I also used to find it funny that Kings... KCL still maintains a link with Simpsons on the Strand. A very, very nice restaurant. And Prof. Lambert, my prof, used to sometimes get a table in there. And he would take the PhD students and would never let us pay. A very nice gentleman and a very nice carvery. Raparosa, you don't hear as much renown in any good books. No, there does need to be a good book about renown. It's one of the interesting things. I was watching Drac the other day, and he was saying in Dry Dock that actually World War II was far more of a battlecruisers war than World War I was. And it's very true. you consider the battle cruisers were far more likely to keep up with the aircraft carriers. It's one of the points I make. If you had the G3s as aircraft carriers, you could guarantee Hood, Renown, and Repulse would have got far more attention. All three would have been fully upgraded before World War II. There would have been none of the no, because they would have been, this is our fast aircraft carrier, and this is its big escort which can keep up with it. And that would be it, because the British were already working on a task force system. But the thing was, with the Glorious, Courageous, and Furious, and the ones coming subsequently, as they were designed, the counties and the bigger cruisers could keep up with them. So that was fine. But if you had something like a G3 carrier, oh my lord, that would have needed a full battle cruiser to get around it. Bertrand, if you travel around the world in 80 days on a bet, do you get a discount and join a reform club? No. Enjoy your breakfast, Stafford. Nick Waters, reminds me of the old chef sitcom where the secret ingredient in the assistant's recipe being served somewhat very posh was daddy sauce. Yuck. That's good. Well, YouTube chat seems to have developed a bug. That's great. There's good iron brew and bad iron brew. I thought iron brew was iron brew. No, there is very nice iron brew. Then there is suitably chilled, very, very nice iron brew. And also suitably chilled, exceptional iron brew. Rapper back. Kingsrook. So many things in today's live stream to include in my sci-fi novel. And also, it's one of the things, again, I think, not having captain stewards, you lose a character in Star Trek, which would be kind of interesting, because think about it. The captain steward goes between the command deck crew and the lower deck crew. It's a very easy way to introduce people to the lower deck. So you don't. That's what I love the new series, Lower Deck. I finally got to watch it. Great series. I have to admit, my favorite in it is the Titan. I'm sorry, that she is a very cool ship. I know I should be liking the star of the show. I should be, rooting for that. But no, when the Titan came on the screen, I was just going, I want that. I want that cartoon or whatever you make of it. I want the Titan story. In fact, if they make it as a cartoon, that would be better. I would love a couple of cartoon series of Star Trek to come out and be properly canon and be properly there. Because they could make it really, really cool. Because there are things you can do in a cartoon you can't do anything else. Especially the way they're drawing it. It's cool. But having a Captain Steward would make so much sense as a way to link those two worlds. So when you're going to write it, it's book 6 on the list. That's good. So lawyers I used to work with were similar. I would often buy my round, and one would quietly remind me that they earned in a day what I earned in a fortnight, and were buying. World War II is Battlecruiser War. Here comes the honourable mention of the Congo class. Again, who kept up with the, the Japanese carrier formation, the Kido Batai. It was the Congos. That's what they were there for. Right. Nick Waters, wasn't Yeoman Rand the nearest thing to Kirk Stewart? Potentially, but it seemed weird. Now, if I can trick either my brother or mum to make some beef Wellington, it looks awesome. It is. Beef Wellington is good. Beef Wellington is really, really good. Constantine, I thought Lower Decks was canon. It is canon. But I'd like another cartoon series which is focused on the adventures of the Titan. I know, I've been watching the Star Trek Lower Decks. Tom Gordon attempted to do a PhD at King's on Sparta, Germany, pre-World War I China, in a comparison of Behemoth to Leviathan. Ooh, to have the time money. That could be fun. Cajun, what's 1 through 5? 1. Tribals, Battles, Darings. 2. Sloops. Potentially though my PhD aircraft carrier book. 3. Henderson. 4 will be the aircraft carrier book if it hasn't come out before us 2 and sort of pushed everyone else up. 5. I want to do a good book about the Arefuser class because they really haven't had a good book about them and what they get up to. And then 6 is Renown. Because you may need a steward if you're going to write 5 books. I probably need my head examined. Anyway, it is now 10 o'clock, and as I said, there is a fluffy research assistant asking for me to take him out, so I'm going to finish here. I hope you've enjoyed. Thank you again for all the super chats. Thank you again for all the interesting questions. Thank you again. I hope you enjoyed the books. I will update the description sometime this evening. And thank you again for being here. And I'm sorry this wasn't as long as it usually is and not starting its normal time. I do apologise for that. As said, I was out there finishing off the office, starting to finishing off the office. The builders were supposed to turn up yesterday, didn't turn up, and I'm let's put it this way, I am suspicious they won't turn up again this week, and won't turn up at all. So I have a feeling I'll be finishing it all off, and with a little help from my friends. As I said, Drac was very kind with his electric screwdriver, his ladder, and his soundproofing. So he's very, very kindly helped me do a lot. Calm announcement. I'm about to raise an Iron Brew fund for you to make the 7 book about World War I Adriatic. That's about, my plan is about a book a year to try and get through. One book every year or two. I get to work at chop. The trouble is, it's getting into the archives at the moment. Right. Thank you, everyone. Take care. Take care, Bijan. Take care, Silly Manicos. Take care, Calvin Gasberg. Take care, Nick Walters. Gahedron, take care. Grass RC, take care. Nick Waters, if I fit the FRA with a flask of something strong, St. Bernard style, I can guarantee both the FRA and Tafra would actually drink it. They wouldn't understand the whole concept of the St. Bernard of giving it to someone else. No, if it's good and strong, they'll drink it. John and Shay, take care. Carhadron, take care. All hail to Catalina. Not a Wolf, thank you. Take care. Yickers, thank you. Do you have update on your book release? It's supposed to be March. I have got another chapter to edit for waiting to come to me from the publishers, but it's still supposed to be out in March. I'm just finishing off an article for Britain at War magazine about it, so it's supposed to be timed up for March, and everything's done, so, hope so. And as I said, I've been on French television for the last week or so, talking about Neuschwanstein Castle. Guys, have a nice vac, shower, walk, calories, and sleep. That will all be good. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Red. Thank you, Paul Johnson. Thank you, Calvin Gasberg. Thank you, Carmen. Thank you, Stafford Thompson. Thank you, North Wolf. Thank you, Bill Bolton. Stephen Wells. All right, thank you. Kingsrook, thank you. Nick Vasa, thank you. New IKB 472, night. Greg Sarsky, thank you, night. And Thank you, Dep Squad. Thank you, Carl Harmon. Thank you, Nick Walters. Thank you, Juno191. Thank you, Goodmom Golding. And thank you, Grace Sahowski. Thank you, Dep Squad. And take care. All hail the Blackburn as well, if that makes you happy. Take care. Although if I get the tax office turning up to ask me what religion I've started, I'm claiming no knowledge of it. Carl Gosbo, take care. Yickers, take care. Grace Sahowski, take care. And take care.